Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Dar's Nights. I know many of you use these videos to relax or fall asleep, so before you drift off, leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's get comfortable and begin. They told us the town of Ashridge burned down in 1971. That every trace of it was erased, charred to dust, condemned by the state, and swallowed by the Appalachians. But what if I told you that was a lie? What if the town still exists, frozen in time, hidden in a part of the forest where no GPS signal dares to follow, and no satellite ever seems to see? My name is Marshall Carter, and last month, I opened a sealed FBI case file marked Top Secret, 2003. Inside were photos, grainy black and whites, of men with their mouths filled with coal dust. All seated around dinner tables like mannequins, smiling like they knew what was coming. They called him the Hollow Man. A legend. A killer. A whisper passed through the darkness of the mines. But the photos were real. And so was the last message ever recorded before a federal agent vanished investigating this case. He's not a man. He's the mine. The mine is alive. I should have closed the file. I should have burned it. But I didn't. I went looking for Ashridge. And now, I think I brought something back. The file wasn't supposed to exist. Tucked inside a dented steel cabinet in the far back of the evidence archive, its label was smudged and faded, barely legible. No barcode. No digital record. Just a red stamp that bled through the cover like old blood, sealed 2003, federal access only. Most agents would have passed it over. Maybe out of instinct. Maybe because, deep down, even the most hardened lawman knows when not to touch something. But there are always the ones who can't leave well enough alone. Inside, the folder smelled like mildew and decay, like it had been pulled from a collapsed basement. The paper was brittle, yellowed. Some pages had mold creeping up the corners. But the contents? They were unlike anything in standard case files. Not murder weapons. Not autopsy photos. Not timelines or suspect sketches. This file held something older. Stranger. More, wrong. The first photo was of a man in a neatly pressed 1970s suit, seated at a wooden table inside a crumbling cabin. His eyes were open. His mouth was open, too, gaping, overflowing with black dust. Coal dust. His hands rested flat against the table, knuckles pale, as if he'd been posed. The timestamp read 1973. Location, Boone County, West Virginia. The second photo was nearly identical. Different man. Different table. Same expression. Same dust. By the sixth photo, the pattern had become undeniable. From 1969 to 2003, over a span of 3 decades, the same murder had taken place at least 19 times across Appalachia. The victims were always male, always alone, and always found seated upright, mouths filled with coal residue, eyes wide and empty. Each was discovered in abandoned structures, collapsed shacks, forgotten churches, rotting trailers deep in the woods. Not one scene showed signs of forced entry. No fingerprints. No footprints. Not even tire tracks. Just silence and dust. There were no known suspects. No arrests. No media coverage. Every report in the folder bore classification codes that marked it for internal eyes only. The reports had a pattern too, each one filed, investigated, and then promptly closed without resolution. Some pages even had full paragraphs blacked out. One report had an entire page missing, with a single line scribbled in pen where it had been removed: "He doesn't walk in. He seeps." At the back of the folder was an audio tape. A standard issue FBI field recorder, the kind used in the early 2000s. It was labeled Harlan, last known transmission. The transcript clipped to it was short. Just 18 seconds. Harlan was an undercover agent who went dark during a backwoods investigation in '03. His last location pinged somewhere between Boone and Raleigh counties, an area that had been sealed off for mining contamination decades ago. His voice, on the tape, cracked and broken, spoke only one line before static swallowed the rest. "He's not a man. He's the mine. The mine is alive." The signature at the bottom of that page was from someone high up, too high. Their name had been redacted, but the clearance code was stamped with a level usually reserved for national security threats, not regional homicides. That alone would have made any agent back off. Close the folder. Move on. But there was one more document, folded inside a plastic evidence sleeve, tucked almost like a hidden secret. A torn page from what looked like a local town register. A small map drawn in pencil. Faded ink marked an X over a location labeled Ashridge. The problem? Ashridge didn't exist on any current map. Not digital, not paper. The town had no zip code, no county listing, no historical census. A few articles in the 1960s made passing references to a mining community by that name, but after 1971, it vanished from public record entirely. According to one surviving newspaper clipping, Ashridge was lost in a fire that swept through the mountain, claiming all 27 lives. But the photo clip to that article told a different story. In the background of the charred foundation, standing upright, completely untouched by flame, was a man-shaped shadow. Just tall enough. Just human enough. But faceless. Its head a black blur, body elongated unnaturally, as if captured mid-movement, but everything else in the photo was perfectly still. There were no case conclusions. No summary page. Just a handwritten note on the inside cover of the folder. Do not reopen. He hears when he's remembered. And yet, now the folder sat wide open on a metal desk. Its contents breathing again under the fluorescent buzz of forgotten lights. It had been sealed for a reason. But some things, once exposed to air again, don't stay quiet. Especially the ones buried beneath the earth. The deeper the records went, the colder the pattern became. Not just because of what was found in those old pages, but because of what wasn't there. In law enforcement, most patterns screen for attention, repeat offenders, signature kills, geographic clusters. But this one whispered. It didn't demand notice. It waited to be stumbled upon, like a snare hidden in brush, waiting for the wrong step. There were 19 bodies officially documented. 19 that could be confirmed. But there were more, others that slipped through the cracks, dismissed as accidents, overdoses, or vagrant deaths. Men who died alone, out of sight, in places no one searched until the smell forced a hand. When all the coroner's reports were cross-checked, they revealed identical oddities. Coal dust in the trachea, but no exposure to active mines. No abrasions on the lips, nose, or hands. No soot in the lungs. The dust hadn't been inhaled, it had been placed. Each victim was found seated, upright, often at tables or in chairs that hadn't been touched in years. In one case, the victim was discovered at a collapsed bar stool inside an abandoned dance hall. In another, the man was posed in a rocking chair inside a trailer that had burned halfway down decades prior. The bodies weren't decomposed beyond what was natural, but their eyes, always wide open, showed early stages of vitreous hemorrhaging, as if they had seen something too long. Something too bright. Or too dark. The victims weren't from the area. Every single one was from out of town. Drifters. Surveyors. Inspectors. Federal employees with no family ties in Appalachia. Some were filed as missing persons in other states. Some had no records at all, just names on dog tags or IDs weathered beyond recognition. All males. All alone. All between the ages of 33 and 57. Not a single witness, not a single recorded scream. Dates didn't form a clean interval. The murders weren't annual, weren't seasonal. But when plotted against a topographic map of the Appalachian coal belt, they formed a jagged, spiraling radius, always returning inward, toward one unmarked location. Right where Ashridge should have been. Forensic reports were equally strange. DNA was clean. No signs of struggle, trauma, or restraint. Toxicology was always inconclusive. One lab report indicated extremely high levels of pyrophoric dust on the victim's clothing, dust that ignites spontaneously in air, but no signs of burns. Another report flagged trace levels of cadmium, lead, and selenium concentrated around the mouths and nostrils. Toxic enough to kill. But none of the men died from poisoning. According to the death certificates, every one of them had succumbed to asphyxiation by particulate obstruction. In plain terms, they choked. Slowly. Without fighting back. There were patterns in the noise, too. CB radio logs pulled from truckers in the region reported static disruptions near Route 74, followed by what some described as old music playing faintly, ragtime, piano loops, or humming. All reports timestamped between 3 o'clock and 3:30 a.m. Always the same range. Always the same stretch of road. Several of the men had journals or notes. The kind of things people keep on road trips or work assignments. And in 3 separate cases, spread over 22 years, the final entry was the same phrase, written in different handwriting. He knocks once for the mind. Twice for the body. The third knock is the door. No one ever explained that line. It was never reported in media, never leaked. But there it was, written by 3 men who never met, in towns that hadn't existed on maps for decades. Then came the disappearances. Names that weren't just dead, but erased. 3 coal inspectors assigned by the Federal Bureau of Mines in the early 1980s, no obituaries, no personnel files, no resignation letters. Even FOIA requests returned empty. Internal memos marked their assignments to the Boone County area, but no one ever signed them back in. Their government-issued vehicles were found weeks later, covered in pine needles and moss, 30 miles from any paved road. Other agents had tried to investigate. That much was clear from the folder. Margins were scribbled with notes in different hands, suggesting someone else had been connecting the dots long before. The handwriting grew increasingly erratic the deeper the timeline went, calm at first, then slanted, rushed, barely legible. One line appeared repeatedly, like a desperate mantra. He doesn't live in the town. The town lives in him. The final documented case before the file was sealed occurred in late autumn of 2003. A federal census worker was sent to the area to confirm the closure of rural housing zones near the mining belt. He was never found. His last known phone call, recorded by the service provider but never answered, was to his wife. Only one sentence was left on the voicemail, spoken in a breathless, broken whisper. "It's not a place, it's a mouth." After that, the file stopped. No more entries. No arrests. No press coverage. Just silence. It was as if the pattern had been quietly acknowledged, then buried, sealed behind red tape and locked drawers, left to rot under layers of dust and bureaucratic amnesia. But patterns don't die. They wait. Especially the ones that were never supposed to be seen. The tape was never meant to be heard again. Labeled, sealed, and triple-stamped for destruction, it somehow evaded incineration. Maybe it was misfiled. Maybe it refused to burn. But it surfaced again, decades later, inside a misrouted box from the evidence control facility in Quantico. The chain of custody was broken. No one could explain how or why it had been delivered to the cold case review team. The label read only, Harlan, Tape B. There was no tape A to compare it to. Standard issue FBI cassettes ran on looped mini-reels, used for field notes or remote recordings. This one had been stopped mid-play. The magnetic strip had warped in places, suggesting repeated exposure to heat. There were tears along the edges of the plastic casing, as if someone had tried to break it open by hand. The damage wasn't accidental. It looked like fear. Like someone had tried to kill the sound. Still, it was digitized. Cleaned. Enhanced. Played through audio isolation software to filter out background noise. Analysts expected distortion, maybe broken speech, wind, equipment failure. What they got was something else. The tape opened with silence. 17 full seconds of dead air. Then the clicking began, faint, rhythmic. Not static. Not interference. It sounded mechanical. Not like gears, but something older. Bone against wood. Hollow and repetitive, like a metronome buried deep underground. Analysts described it as organic. One referred to it as insect-like. Another said it reminded her of prayer beads being passed over and over, faster than any human could move. Then came the voice. It wasn't Harlan. Not at first. The first voice was low, thick with air, like someone speaking through a cavern. It whispered a name, unintelligible, but repeated 3 times. Each repetition came closer to the microphone, though no footsteps were heard. The software couldn't identify the speaker's vocal profile. It registered as human, but with irregular inflection, like a voice trying to mimic speech it didn't quite understand. Then Harlan spoke. He was panicked. Breathing hard. His voice trembled between fear and disbelief. He wasn't describing what he saw. He was describing what he couldn't unsee. Fragments of sentences came through. Mouth was the floor, still moving even though it was stone, not dead, just deep. He kept repeating that he hadn't found a person, but a place that was alive. Breathing. Pulsing. He said he saw walls made of ribs. Not carved. Not built. Grown. At the 2-minute mark, the tape became corrupted. A loop started. Harlan's voice repeated the same 6 seconds on a delay, overlaid with another sound that couldn't be filtered, low-frequency hums, matching subsonic patterns usually found in cave collapses. But there had been no seismic activity recorded during the time of the tape. Then something new bled through. A third sound, untraceable, but present. A moan that wasn't human. Not a scream. Not a cry for help. It was a long, aching exhale that rose and fell like a breathing pattern, except deeper, slower, and impossibly long. The waveform showed no pause for inhalation. In the background, a faint song began to play. Out of nowhere. A recording, warbled and slowed. Some analysts identified it as a 1912 phonograph tune, When the Bees Are in the Clover. It sounded like it was playing from a broken music box buried in soil. The melody was slightly warped, with one note stretched longer than the others, as if something were holding it back deliberately, preventing it from ending. Then came the second voice. This one was closer. Female sounding but wrong, like someone imitating a woman's cadence without understanding emotion. It said only one sentence. What feeds once must feed again. Static overtook the recording for exactly 41 seconds. No background noise. No voices. Just harsh, white silence. Then, for a brief moment, Harlan screamed. It was abrupt. No struggle. No build-up. Just one long, cracking scream that cut off instantly, mid-breath. The microphone registered a distortion spike, a brief, sharp frequency that registered beyond human hearing. Some who analyzed it later complained of headaches. A few described seeing shapes in the spectrogram they couldn't explain. One technician reported hearing whispers for days afterward, even when nothing was playing. At the very end of the tape, just before the recording cut off entirely, came a final sound. A knock. 3 of them. Slow, deliberate. As if someone, or something, stood directly in front of the mic and rapped once for each word it intended to echo. It didn't sound like hand against wood. It sounded deeper. Denser. Like something knocking from inside a wall, far too thick for anyone to be heard through. And yet, it was perfectly clear. The digital version of the tape was stored on an isolated hard drive. But the original cassette was gone. Vanished from the locked room it had been kept in, with no signs of forced entry. All security footage during the disappearance was corrupted. The only clue left was a single note, handwritten on the access log clipboard in red ink. He's out. He walked through the static. Ashridge wasn't on most maps. Even before it was erased, it had barely existed in records, clinging to the edge of the national grid like a parasite town. Founded in 1871 during a brief coal boom, it never grew large enough to matter. No highways ran through it. No one famous was born there. It had no claim to history except its absence from it. When the mines dried up, the town rotted slowly from the inside, swallowed by its own silence. But locals whispered that Ashridge didn't die like other towns. It was hidden. The census stopped counting after 1940. Not because everyone left, some did, but because those who remained couldn't be categorized. The town had residents, but no one knew where their mail went. The last known post office shuttered in 1957, and the building vanished 2 years later. Not demolished. Gone, like it had folded into itself overnight. No debris. Just foundation marks where it had once stood, blackened like scorched earth, though there'd been no fire. By the 1970s, Ashridge was referred to only in internal memos and off-the-record chatter. FBI field agents sometimes joked about the town that eats inquiries. The Bureau had sent someone once, a profiler, unofficial, back in 1968. His notes survived only as redacted summaries. He never filed a full report. The only line that remained untouched said, "The streets repeat themselves. You can walk in any direction and end up where you started, but it's not the same version of the place." Emergency services avoided the area entirely. 911 calls from the Ashridge vicinity were rare, but when they came, they were always the same, unintelligible static, punctuated by distant sobbing or rhythmic tapping. GPS coordinates would show locations inside homes that had been condemned or torn down years prior. Officers who tried to follow up on calls would often report getting lost within minutes, despite having maps and working navigation systems. One sheriff's deputy once said his car drove in circles for hours until it ran out of gas, even though the gas station was only 3 blocks away. No one wanted to admit it, but the town distorted perception. The few satellite images that captured Ashridge over the years showed different layouts, sometimes showing wide-open grids, sometimes a tangled spiral of roads that made no urban sense. Trees seemed to grow in strange, calculated patterns, perfect circles, symbols, arrangements not found in nature. One series of aerial photographs from 1999 revealed something deeply unsettling. The town's layout formed a symbol matching no known alphabet, but eerily close to the sigils found in medieval grimoires. Children who lived within 10 miles of the border reported the same dream, always at age 7. In it, they stood at the foot of a long, crooked hill and watched a house breathe. Not shake. Not rumble. Breathe. Walls expanding like lungs. Chimneys whistling like windpipes. The house would always whisper a name. Never the same name. But always a name the child would later claim wasn't supposed to be remembered. Parents dismissed these dreams until one boy drew the house from memory, and it matched an old sketch buried in Ashridge's abandoned town hall. A building that had not existed for 40 years. In 2004, a regional construction company attempted to build a bypass highway through what was then considered part of the Ashridge outskirts. Within 3 days, work halted. 4 workers went missing. 2 returned with severe, unexplained burns and psychological trauma. They couldn't explain where they'd been, only that they walked through someone else's town. All equipment failed within a 100-yard radius of the dig site. Machinery stalled, batteries drained, and recordings returned only the sound of a ticking clock, always counting backward. The construction was cancelled, and the site was fenced off, then quietly removed from all public development plans. In the documents that followed, Ashridge was listed not as depopulated, but administratively silent. A phrase used nowhere else in federal records. People still try to visit. Ghost hunters. Urban explorers. YouTubers chasing clicks. But their footage never makes it out. Their last posts, if any, are incoherent footage of empty woods, looping trails, or abandoned vehicles. One video, pulled from a corrupted hard drive found 2 towns over, showed only 4 frames that made sense: a crumbling house with a boarded-up window, a man standing motionless in the yard, a sigil carved into the ground, and a door half open in the middle of a wall with no building around it. Locals from nearby counties won't say Ashridge aloud. They call it the far turn or the crooked mile. Kids dare each other to cross its invisible borders but never do. They know the stories. They've heard about the ones who walked in and came back changed. Or didn't come back at all. Sometimes a car is found idling near a dirt road with the driver's door wide open, engine still running, headlights aimed into the tree line. No footprints. No blood. Just the faint scent of burned paper in the air. Ashridge doesn't exist on paper anymore. It's not taught in schools, not listed on signs, and not marked by boundaries. But it's still there. Waiting. Growing in ways that don't make sense. It doesn't need to be seen to pull people in. All it needs is one person to hear their name whispered at night. Just once. And they'll start walking. The name Dean Holloway appeared only once in the Ashridge file, scrawled in blue ink on the edge of a faded case folder dated November 3, 2010. There was no report attached, no witness statement, no digital trail, just the name and a timestamp. Yet Dean Holloway had once been a real man, an IT technician from Pittsburgh with no criminal record, no known mental health history, and a reputation for routine predictability. He worked long hours, paid his taxes, and spent most of his time alone in a small apartment filled with servers, monitors, and half-finished Raspberry Pi projects. Then, without explanation, Dean stopped showing up for work. Emails went unanswered. Calls rang endlessly. After 3 days, his landlord entered the apartment and found everything in perfect order, except for the bathroom mirror, which was shattered inward. The pieces had not fallen onto the floor, but instead had vanished entirely. Not a single shard remained, as though the mirror had imploded and taken itself with it. On the bathroom wall, someone, or something, had scrawled a sequence of numbers using what appeared to be ashes: 46.3919, -80.0031. The coordinates pointed to a forested patch of land on the outskirts of Ashridge. Dean's phone was later discovered near that location by a ranger responding to reports of strange humming in the woods. The device was intact but heavily scorched, as if it had been left too close to an open flame. When powered on, it displayed only one image, a blurry still from what looked like a CCTV feed. In the photo, Dean stood at the edge of a broken road, staring into what should have been an empty field. But there was something else beside him, a man-shaped shadow, standing upright, but lacking any human features. A void in the shape of a person, darker than night, its outline glitching at the edges like corrupted data. Over the next 3 weeks, Dean was reportedly seen in multiple towns, always alone, always silent. He didn't speak, didn't engage. Witnesses claimed he walked past mirrors without casting a reflection. At first, these were dismissed as urban legends or misidentifications, until footage from a gas station security camera caught him entering the restroom. The interior mirror, previously undamaged, cracked instantly when he stepped inside. By the time he left, all reflective surfaces in the store, glass doors, polished countertops, even the glossy parts of soda cans, had warped subtly, distorting light like heat waves. Employees described a sudden metallic taste in their mouths and a high-pitched ringing that lingered for hours. Dean's final confirmed appearance came from a traffic camera near a closed highway that once led through Ashridge. The footage was heavily corrupted, but one frame was salvageable: Dean walking down the center of the deserted road, flanked on both sides by rows of people, dozens of figures standing completely still, facing away from the camera. Each figure had a faint distortion around them, as if the image couldn't decide whether they were real or part of the background. No license plates or landmarks were visible. Just trees, static, and silence. Shortly after the footage leaked on an obscure paranormal forum, individuals who had viewed it began reporting identical symptoms. Visual migraines. Insomnia. Persistent feelings of being watched through mirrors. One viewer described waking up to find every reflective surface in their apartment covered in condensation, though none of the windows had been open and the temperature hadn't changed. Another claimed his bathroom mirror showed not his face, but an image of a decaying town square he'd never seen before. The more people viewed the image, the more severe the reactions became. Eventually, the thread was deleted, and the forum taken offline without warning. Dean Holloway's case never went public. His name disappeared from missing persons databases by 2012. Friends and family who tried to inquire were met with form letters stating the case was closed and all further questions would require national security clearance. One of his coworkers claimed to receive an unmarked package 6 months after Dean vanished. Inside was a VHS tape labeled only with a red wax seal. When played, the tape showed static for 3 minutes, followed by a single frame, a mirror in a dark room, reflecting nothing but a door slowly creaking open. From that moment on, strange reports began to increase in areas surrounding Ashridge. People claimed their reflections blinked out of sync. Some said their mirrors felt warm to the touch at night. A few even reported seeing someone else's face looking back at them, mouthing words they couldn't understand. The phrase, "he walks without a shadow and sleeps inside the glass," began appearing on bathroom walls in public restrooms, etched crudely with broken glass or scratched into soap dispensers. And then the disappearances began. Always near mirrors. Always without signs of forced entry. Rooms left perfectly undisturbed, save for shattered reflections and ash-drawn numbers that always pointed to Ashridge. It was as if the town wasn't content to remain hidden anymore. It had found a way to reach out, through Dean. Or through what Dean had become. Ashridge didn't just take people. It rewrote them. Made them hollow, mirrored shells that could still walk, still look like us, but no longer belonged in the world that made them. At the edge of Interstate 81, where the highway veins fork into forgotten routes and overgrown service roads, there exists a gas station that has appeared on no map since 1997. The structure itself is unremarkable, flat-roofed, rusted signage, peeling paint on its walls, but it continues to emit power long after its last registered transaction. The lights flicker overhead, the pumps hum faintly, and the electronic billboard still flashes gas prices from another era, locked in place at $1.32 per gallon. Truckers who drive the late-night hauls report seeing it from the shoulder as they pass, its neon sign glowing dimly with the words, "Full serve, open 24/7. Yet when those same drivers double back, there's nothing but empty land, flattened weeds, broken concrete, and the crumbling remnants of a parking lot choked with vines. Most ignore the contradiction. Others swear they've stopped there. They describe the experience in unnerving detail, the air inside always cold and still, the shelves perfectly stocked with snacks past their expiration date, and the clerk behind the counter never making eye contact. No one ever remembers the clerk's face. They only recall a sensation, one of being watched not by a person, but by the station itself. An awareness, subtle and ancient, woven into the linoleum and the buzzing fluorescence. Those who purchase anything from the station often discover something strange among their change, coins dated decades into the future, or receipts stamped with the name Ashridge Petroleum, a company that, as far as any record shows, never existed. The deeper the investigation, the more fractured the facts become. County building permits show the land as abandoned. Environmental surveys mark the soil as unstable, prone to sinkholes. And yet the station persists in memory and myth, always described the same way no matter who tells it, down to the number of windows, the radio playing old swing tunes, and the door that refuses to stay shut. Rumors among local law enforcement speak of a patrol car that vanished after pulling into the station to investigate a Code Blue call in 2009. The officer, a young recruit named Mendez, radioed in at 2:13 a.m., stating he'd found an open business in a restricted zone. His last words were garbled, choked with static, and then nothing. His cruiser was later found overturned in a ditch 15 miles away, engine still warm, emergency lights flashing. The dashcam footage ended in static and flickering images of gas pumps slowly turning without being touched. One particularly chilling account came from a man named Troy Collings, a freelance photographer who had been documenting roadside Americana across the U.S. He claimed he found the gas station while driving through Ashridge County at dusk. Fascinated by its condition, he entered to take photos. What he captured inside was never released, but those who viewed his undeveloped film described blurred human forms with elongated limbs, gas pumps twisting mid-frame, and a clock above the register that moved backward. When Troy returned to his motel to review the negatives, his reflection in the mirror was missing. He was found days later, barefoot and disoriented, standing in the middle of the highway muttering coordinates that led back to the station's location. Despite repeated efforts to physically locate or demolish the structure, no consistent success has been achieved. Survey teams that venture out to the site report GPS failures, time loss, and equipment malfunctions. Cameras drain instantly. Compasses spin wildly. The land rejects technology, yet somehow draws people in. Some believe the gas station exists in overlapping time frames, a leftover architecture from a version of Ashridge that never fully died. Others claim it's a feeding ground, something that appears when the veil between places weakens, offering the illusion of normalcy to lure in the curious and lost. There are whispers that the gas itself isn't fuel at all, but something older. A liquid that burns colder than ice, said to fill engines with silence. A handful of victims who drove away from the station in vehicles refueled there never reached their destinations. Their cars were later discovered abandoned on backroads, radios emitting whispers in an unknown language, interiors frosted from the inside out. At night, the station can sometimes be seen from drone footage, glowing faintly on the landscape like a dying star. But when searched during daylight, it vanishes entirely. There's no shadow, no sign of life, only the memory of a place that insists on being real. Over time, travelers report growing compulsions to return to it, even those who only saw it in passing. They dream of aisles that never end, of footsteps echoing behind them in empty restrooms, and of a gas pump nozzle snaking like a tongue through broken glass. Locals no longer speak its name. Old-timers advise locking car doors when passing that stretch of highway and never, under any circumstance, accepting change from a stranger that smells faintly of diesel and mildew. The gas station doesn't sell fuel. It sells access to something no one can understand. It survives between heartbeats, between blinks, waiting for the next soul to mistake it for shelter. Ashridge never closed its doors. It simply found new ones to open. The first drawing was passed off as a child's imagination. A stick figure boy in a blue shirt, standing beside a freshly dug grave, a name crudely scrawled on the headstone. The date written beneath it was just 3 days away. The mother taped it to the refrigerator, smiling politely at what she assumed was a phase. But 3 days later, a local boy matching the figure in the drawing was found dead in the woods behind the elementary school. His grave, dug illegally by some unknown hand, had the same name etched on a piece of slate, Nicholas. The child who drew it, an 8-year-old boy named Ellis Radnor, said very little when asked about it. He only shrugged, eyes glassy, and continued to draw. More graves followed. Each picture eerily accurate. Different names, different shapes and colors, but always the same theme, a grave, a child, and a date. And each time, the body appeared. Each time, the grave looked exactly as he had drawn it. The town of Bloom Ridge, already withering under economic decay and rising addiction rates, began to feel a slow collective tightening around its chest. It wasn't just the deaths, it was the feeling that the drawings were not predictions, but instructions. A sheriff's deputy investigating one of the cases found a sketch in Ellis's room of himself, his cruiser tilted off a bridge, flames rising from the riverbank. The deputy requested emergency leave and fled town the next day. 2 nights later, his replacement drove off that same bridge while responding to a 911 call that no one remembered making. Ellis's drawings began to evolve. The stick figures gained definition. Faces became clearer, grave markers more ornate. Then came the houses. Rows of homes with excess over them. Interiors mapped out with fine detail, where a corpse would fall, where blood would pool, even the time of death scribbled in the corner. One drawing depicted the elementary school engulfed in shadows, children's eyes missing, red circles around their mouths. The drawing was dated for a Friday morning in October. That day, 3 students disappeared during recess. They were found 2 hours later, unconscious in the school basement, their lips torn and sewn shut with thread pulled from the janitor's supply closet. Attempts to stop Ellis from drawing failed. He was moved to a psychiatric facility, where he was kept from pens, pencils, and paper. But even there, he found ways. Scratching shapes into his food tray, using toothpaste on mirrors, even arranging pebbles into patterns on the floor. Every time the staff cleaned it, he did it again. And each new drawing brought another death, another disappearance, another gravestone to match his vision. Doctors tried to explain it as hyper-advanced intuition, perhaps the boy was absorbing clues and trauma from the environment. Others believed he had been traumatized so badly that he had developed a subconscious ability to project terrible truths. But then came the drawing of someone who hadn't been born yet. A baby, unnamed, in a casket shaped like a cradle. A due date marked on the side. The mother was pregnant, just 3 months in. A healthy pregnancy. But on the exact date drawn, the fetus was stillborn. The death certificate described no cause. It became undeniable. Whatever was happening inside Ellis Radnor was not human, not psychological, and not controllable. Families began to leave Bloom Ridge, abandoning their homes overnight. Teachers refused to work. Entire neighborhoods fell silent, windows shuttered, playgrounds grown over with weeds. The cemetery expanded by the month. The boy never cried, never spoke of guilt, and never stopped drawing. At some point, Ellis began to draw things no one could verify. Graves without names. Graves without bodies. Open graves in vast, endless fields. Black skies above them. Twisting roots beneath. People began to fear he was no longer predicting local tragedies, but global ones. One drawing showed a map of the United States split in half by a jagged line, black rivers running from its core. Another depicted churches burning under a sky full of eyes. The date next to it was marked with the year 2041. Scholars, cultists, and government agents started arriving in secret. They viewed the drawings not as warnings, but as blueprints. A few even tried to replicate the scenes in controlled environments. None of those individuals survived the experiments. One team of analysts, locked in an underground lab, attempted to destroy a set of drawings. The facility went dark for 6 hours. When power returned, all 12 members were found dead, lying in a circle around a perfect replica of one of Ellis's earliest drawings, a grave marked "Believers." By the time Ellis turned 10, he had drawn more than 400 graves. 206 of them had come true. The remaining were labeled as pending. The boy had no memory of the drawings after they were completed. His parents vanished in the middle of the night, leaving no note, no trace. Only one thing remained in their empty home, a final sketch taped to the wall, showing 2 empty coffins side by side, dirt freshly disturbed. There is one drawing that has yet to be fully understood. It's the only one Ellis ever colored red from edge to edge. No grave. No name. Just red. A date is scrawled in the corner, one that's still 3 years away. But across the red sheet, written in tiny, obsessive lettering, are the same 3 words repeated thousands of times. We were warned. Ridgepoint Hollow was a place locals spoke of in hushed tones, a stretch of dense forest where few dared to wander after dusk. Tucked away in that shadowed maze was a house that seemed to exist and not exist all at once. It was called the Hollow House, a phrase passed down by generations who whispered of its strange nature, a home that vanished from memory as easily as it vanished from sight. The first documented encounter with the Hollow House dated back to 1963, when a family of 4 moved into the area, hoping to escape the growing bustle of nearby towns. They described the house as charming, isolated, and welcoming. But within a week, neighbors reported the family had disappeared without a trace. No calls, no notes, no signs of packing. The house, when searched, was found empty and strangely void of personal belongings. More unsettling was the fact that no official records could confirm the family ever existed. Over the decades, Ridgepoint Hollow attracted the attention of hunters, hikers, and thrill-seekers, all eager to find the infamous house. Those who claimed to see it described a 2-story wooden structure with peeling white paint, surrounded by tall pines and thick fog that never seemed to lift. Yet, when they returned with others to show the house, it was gone. Only twisted roots and moss-covered stones marked where it should have stood. The Hollow House did not simply disappear, it manipulated perception and memory. People who spent time near it reported losing hours, sometimes days. Their watches stopped working, and compasses spun aimlessly. Maps became useless. Phones died as if drained by an invisible force. Those who finally escaped spoke of confusion, a creeping dread, and the feeling that the forest itself was alive, watching, waiting. Most chilling were the accounts from the few who dared enter the house. Inside, the layout shifted constantly. Walls moved, hallways stretched or shrank, and doors led to rooms that defied logic, kitchens filled with freezing ice, living rooms that echoed with laughter no one could place, and bedrooms where shadows danced without light. Furniture appeared old yet untouched by dust, windows showed different views at different moments, sometimes revealing otherworldly landscapes. One man, a forest ranger named Callum Pierce, vanished after being sent to investigate strange lights near Ridgepoint Hollow. Months later, he was found miles away on the edge of a swamp, unable to remember how he got there. His only clue was a journal filled with frantic sketches of the Hollow House, including impossible floor plans and cryptic notes in margins. It watches. It waits. Time is not real here. Pierce died quietly in a hospital weeks later, never regaining consciousness. Folklore grew around the house. Some believed it was a gateway, a liminal space between worlds, where time folded back on itself and reality blurred. Others thought it was a trap for souls, a prison for those who stumbled into its grasp. There were stories of people walking inside the house only to reappear decades older, or of travelers who entered through one door and exited into another time, another place. Stranger still were the disappearances linked to Ridgepoint Hollow. Not all involved the house directly, but those who vanished in the forest were rumored to have seen the house first, a warning, or an invitation. Search parties were often found days later, scattered and disoriented, some with inexplicable injuries or signs of severe trauma. The local sheriff's office eventually stopped logging the missing persons cases connected to the Hollow, labeling them unsolvable or classifying them as wilderness accidents. In 1998, an investigative journalist named Lena Marlowe took a special interest in the Hollow House. She spent months interviewing witnesses, gathering old photographs, and mapping the Hollow's terrain. Her articles, published in underground magazines, sparked a small following of enthusiasts and occultists. Marlowe proposed that the house was not a physical building at all but an elaborate psychic projection tied to a traumatic event buried deep in Ridgepoint's past, a massacre of settlers that had left the land cursed and haunted. Lena's work attracted unwanted attention. After publishing a detailed map showing the last known coordinates of the house, she disappeared. Her notes were found scattered near the edge of Ridgepoint Hollow, soaked in rain and covered with smudged symbols. Her camera, left behind, contained only static and a single photo of a blurred white structure surrounded by dark trees. Over time, theories about the Hollow House grew darker. Some claimed it was a living entity, feeding on fear and confusion. Others said it was a cosmic anomaly, a fragment of a shattered universe leaking into ours. The most disturbing theory was whispered among those who believed the house chose its victims. It allowed itself to be found only by those who carried secrets, guilt, or grief too heavy to bear, offering an escape that was never truly an escape. The Hollow House's influence stretched beyond the forest. A wave of strange phenomena followed those who encountered it: inexplicable nightmares, sudden personality changes, and, in some cases, the ability to see fleeting visions of the house even when far away. Some claimed to hear its creaking floorboards in their dreams, or to feel the cold draft of its unseen windows. Ridgepoint Hollow remains uncharted territory. Modern technology fails there. Satellites do not penetrate its canopy, and GPS devices consistently misreport their location. The house itself is a blank spot on every map, a missing piece in the puzzle of the Hollow's dark history. It exists on the edge of reality, a puzzle no one has yet solved. And it waits. Not for everyone. Only for those who have lost their way, not just in the forest, but in life. Those drawn by pain, by regret, by the unshakable feeling that the world they know is no longer enough. For them, the Hollow House opens its doors wide, welcoming them into a place where time unravels, memories twist, and the boundaries between life and death blur beyond recognition. The first call came at exactly midnight. The phone rang once, then went silent when answered. At first, it was assumed to be a prank, an anonymous dialer trying to unsettle people. But then the caller began to speak. A low, steady voice that knew the deepest, darkest secrets of whoever picked up. Names, dates, hidden moments no one else should have known. Confessions buried so deep even the victims themselves tried to forget. No one could trace the calls. They came from unlisted numbers, burner phones, and sometimes from numbers that didn't exist at all. The calls weren't always threatening. Sometimes the voice whispered warnings. Other times, it recounted memories in painful detail, twisting the past until the listener's sanity frayed. The caller never identified himself, only promising that the secrets he revealed would be heard by many more, and that silence would not save anyone. Small towns across the Midwest reported the phenomenon simultaneously. People of all ages, teachers, police officers, factory workers, received the calls. Each was personalized. The caller's knowledge was terrifyingly accurate, often revealing things only the person or their closest confidant knew. Attempts to alert the police were futile. When investigators looked into the numbers, all leads vanished into digital voids. Phones that received the calls would sometimes die or explode, destroying evidence. The impact was devastating. Relationships broke under the weight of exposed lies. Families fractured, friendships dissolved. Some recipients were found weeks later, curled in corners, whispering the same phrases the caller repeated: "No one is safe. No one is innocent." A handful went missing altogether, leaving only the ringing phone behind, its display showing the caller ID, unknown. As the calls continued, the content grew more sinister. The caller didn't just expose secrets, he predicted actions. Tomorrow at noon, you will meet the one who will betray you. By Friday, your world will end. And often, the predictions came true. Deaths by overdose, car crashes, sudden illnesses. People stopped trusting their own lives, waiting in dread for what the caller said to come. One man, a retired detective named Daniel Harkins, took it upon himself to find the source. A skeptic by nature, he dismissed the calls as elaborate hoaxes until he received one himself. The voice recounted a crime Daniel had buried in his past, a cover-up that haunted him still. It threatened to expose him to his estranged daughter, the only family he had left. Harkins became obsessed, tracing patterns, interviewing victims, compiling data. The calls always happened at midnight, but the intervals varied unpredictably. The only clue was a strange background noise, a faint static that sometimes crackled with what sounded like a lullaby, sung backwards. Harkins theorized the caller wasn't human. Some victims claimed to hear unnatural sounds over the line, whispers layered beneath the voice, groans that didn't belong to any known creature, faint screams as if from another realm. The detective believed the caller was an entity feeding on guilt and fear, growing stronger with every confession it extracted. A shadowy figure emerged in the investigation, someone, or something, that seemed to control the calls. It was never seen, but its presence was felt. Harkins nicknamed it the Midnight Caller. The entity was tied to a series of unsolved disappearances stretching back decades, always linked to moments when people were forced to confront their worst selves. Those who fell silent after the calls were rumored to have been taken by it. Communities tried to fight back. Churches held all-night vigils. Families smashed phones and destroyed electronics. Local legends grew about a curse attached to answering the phone after midnight. But nothing stopped the calls. They adapted, using newer technologies, texts, emails, even social media messages bearing the same twisted knowledge. The Midnight Caller evolved with the times, relentless and unstoppable. In one chilling incident, a teenager named Emma received a call that exposed a secret about her father's death, a secret no one else in the family knew. The next day, Emma was found unconscious in a river, the phone clenched in her hand, the screen cracked but still showing, unknown. When she woke, she refused to speak about what the caller told her, but her eyes held a terror that never faded. The Midnight Caller seemed to target vulnerability. Those weighed down by regret, betrayal, or fear were the first to receive the calls. But no one was truly safe. Some of the most devout, the most righteous, even those with no apparent sins, were haunted too. The entity's reach was vast, crossing state lines and social divides. It was an equalizer in darkness, proving that secrets, whether known or unknown, had power. Digital experts tried to trap the source by setting up bait phones with advanced trace technology, hoping to lure the caller into revealing its location. All attempts failed. The devices either stopped working or the calls never came. It was as if the caller existed everywhere and nowhere, a ghost in the machine beyond any human grasp. One final theory gained traction among those studying the phenomenon: the Midnight Caller was a manifestation of collective guilt and hidden sins. It fed on the secrets people tried to bury, growing stronger with every confession and every lie uncovered. It was less a person and more a force, an unstoppable reckoning that had been unleashed in an era obsessed with digital connectivity and exposure. Those who ignored the calls often suffered the worst. Stories surfaced of entire families wiped out after refusing to answer, or of individuals found dead with a phone by their side, screen lit and ringing endlessly. The calls were not just a message, they were a curse, a warning, and a punishment. Yet, despite the horror, some clung to hope. A few claimed to have spoken back, to have challenged the caller, and lived to tell about it. Their stories were sparse and fragmented, often dismissed as hallucinations or lies. But they spoke of moments where the voice hesitated, faltered, even begged. Some believed the caller was trapped, bound by its own need to expose truths, unable to find peace. In a world increasingly interconnected yet isolated by secrets, the Midnight Caller stood as a grim reminder: no secret stays hidden forever. No darkness remains buried. And in the silence after the last ring, the truth waits, patient, hungry, inevitable. For years, Ethan Cole was known as one of the most promising photographers on the East Coast. His work captured more than just images, it revealed stories, emotions, and secrets hidden behind the surface. Ethan's specialty was urban decay, abandoned buildings, forgotten neighborhoods, places where history seemed frozen in time. He had an uncanny ability to find beauty in neglect and silence. His last assignment took him to an old industrial district on the outskirts of Detroit. The area was a ghost town, with crumbling factories and rusted machinery swallowed by weeds. Locals warned him that the district was cursed, but Ethan thrived on such tales. He believed in truth over superstition and was determined to capture the heart of the abandoned city. Ethan spent days exploring the ruins, photographing broken windows, graffiti-stained walls, and rusting metal. His camera roll filled with haunting images, every shot framed with eerie precision. But then, in the heart of the district, he discovered something that changed everything: an old, forgotten warehouse with no record in city archives, untouched by looters and unseen by anyone but him. Inside the warehouse, Ethan's lens found its final subject. Shadows clung to the walls, and the air was thick with a silence that pressed against his skin. He photographed the peeling paint, the shattered glass, the skeletal remains of machines. But as he raised his camera to capture one last frame, he noticed something impossible: a faint, flickering figure just beyond the edge of the lens's viewfinder. It was not quite human, but it wore the shape of a man. Ethan snapped the photo, heart pounding, and when he lowered the camera, the figure vanished. The warehouse seemed to breathe around him, alive with secrets. Ethan's last photos contained something terrifying. Developed in his darkroom, the images revealed more than decayed walls. Faint faces appeared where none should have been, eyes staring from cracked bricks, mouths frozen in silent screams, shadows twisted into unnatural shapes. Each photo seemed to carry a fragment of a story that clawed its way out of the past. He shared the images with a close friend, a local historian named Claire, who immediately recognized symbols and markings embedded in the photos. They belonged to a cult that had once operated in the city, a group obsessed with dark rituals, disappearances, and sacrifices. The warehouse was rumored to be their last hideout, a place where they performed unthinkable acts that had driven the district to ruin. Ethan grew obsessed, returning to the warehouse night after night, trying to capture more evidence. But each visit took a toll on his mind. He began hearing whispers carried on the wind, seeing fleeting figures at the edge of his vision. Sleep abandoned him. He spoke of feeling watched, followed by unseen eyes that burned with hatred. His final photograph was different. Taken just hours before he vanished, the image was blurred but unmistakable, a distorted face pressed against a cracked windowpane, eyes pleading and mouth open in a silent scream. The photo's metadata recorded the exact time, 3:17 a.m. Ethan's disappearance baffled investigators. His equipment was found abandoned in the warehouse, cameras still loaded with undeveloped film. The negatives themselves became evidence of the unknown. Attempts to recover the film electronically failed, digital copies came out corrupted or entirely black. Only physical development revealed the haunting images, and even then, some photos were so damaged they defied explanation. Rumors spread that Ethan had been claimed by the same dark force trapped in the warehouse, a force that fed on curiosity and fear. Some said he was drawn into the shadows, never to return. Others whispered that he had uncovered a truth too terrible to face, and the cult's curse ensured his silence forever. Strangers who dared to enter the warehouse after Ethan's disappearance reported chilling experiences. Cold spots where breath turned to frost, echoes of laughter without source, and fleeting glimpses of a man with a camera wandering the halls. One urban explorer found Ethan's final photograph pinned to a wall, surrounded by strange symbols drawn in what looked like ash or soot. The city itself seemed to mourn. The district fell deeper into decay, a scar on the landscape, whispered about as a place where the veil between worlds thinned. The warehouse remained untouched by developers or vandals, as if protected by an unseen force. Ethan Cole's final frame became a legend, a frozen moment capturing not just a ghostly figure, but the presence of something far more sinister. Photographers and thrill-seekers alike were drawn to the mystery, but few returned with stories, and fewer still with proof. The last image haunted those who saw it. Some claimed that the eyes in the photo followed them, that the silent scream was a call for help or a warning. The face pressed to the glass was both human and something else, a bridge between the living and the forgotten dead. In the end, Ethan's work was never published. His negatives were locked away in a private collection, sealed with warnings to never attempt to reproduce the images. But the legend of the vanishing photographer lived on, a chilling reminder that some truths lie buried for a reason, and that in the search for light, one may only find darkness. The diary was found hidden beneath the floorboards of a long-abandoned house in a forgotten neighborhood of Cleveland. Its leather cover was cracked and worn, pages yellowed by time, yet the ink remained remarkably clear. The handwriting was small, precise, and deeply personal, a voice frozen in desperation and fear. No one knew who the diary belonged to at first. The house had been empty for decades, a shell of memories left to rot. But as investigators and historians pored over the entries, a name began to emerge: Sarah Whitmore, a young woman who vanished without a trace in the summer of 1983. Her disappearance had been one of the many cold cases buried beneath the city's grime and apathy. Sarah's words revealed a life trapped in silence. She wrote of an abusive relationship, of secrets kept hidden from friends and family, of a constant dread that gnawed at her sanity. Her entries started with hope, plans to leave, dreams of freedom, but quickly spiraled into a detailed chronicle of fear and isolation. The diary spoke of a man named Thomas Gray, a figure both charming and terrifying. Thomas was a local businessman, respected on the surface but rumored to have a darker side. Sarah described how she met him, how his attention turned obsessive, how his anger became a shadow stalking her every step. She wrote about his threats, his manipulation, and the night she realized she was no longer safe. Each page grew more frantic. Sarah detailed the ways Thomas controlled her, cutting off contact with friends, isolating her from family, twisting her reality until she questioned her own memories. The last entries were scrawled in a trembling hand, fragmented sentences hinting at plans to escape, cryptic warnings, and a desperate plea for someone, anyone, to find her if she disappeared. What made the diary chilling was what came after the final page. Tucked inside was a photograph, faded and torn but unmistakable. It showed Sarah standing outside a warehouse, the same one where Ethan Cole had vanished years later. Behind her loomed a shadowy figure, too indistinct to identify, but its presence was menacing. The connection between Sarah's diary and the warehouse was undeniable. Investigators reopened the cold case, looking deeper into Thomas Gray's background and his ties to the district. They uncovered a trail of disappearances, all women, all linked to the man's businesses or social circles. Yet, despite mounting evidence, Thomas had never been charged. His alibis were solid, witnesses intimidated, and the city's corruption shielded him like a ghost. As the diary circulated among law enforcement and journalists, those who read it reported feeling a heavy unease. Some spoke of nightmares filled with Sarah's voice, pleading for justice. Others claimed to hear whispered warnings late at night, soft echoes of her final written words, "Don't let him win." The diary wasn't just a record of abuse, it was a map of terror, a testament to a life lived in shadows. Sarah's writing revealed the invisible chains that bound her, the silencing of victims, and the horrors hidden beneath polished facades. In the weeks following the diary's discovery, strange occurrences plagued the city. Phones rang with no caller, dark figures were glimpsed near the old warehouse, and some of those who had handled the diary reported sudden illness or bouts of intense fear. The whispers in the wind grew louder, as if Sarah's spirit was awakening, demanding the truth be heard. A group of activists took up Sarah's cause, rallying to uncover more victims and hold Thomas Gray accountable. They faced threats, sabotage, and dismissal, but their determination never wavered. The diary became a symbol, proof that silence could be broken, that shadows could be brought into light. Yet, the diary also carried a curse. Those who tried to expose the full story faced mysterious setbacks. Witnesses recanted, evidence disappeared, and a veil of fear spread through the community. It was as if an unseen force was determined to keep Sarah's fate, and those of countless others, buried forever. Despite this, Sarah's diary remained a beacon. It reminded everyone that behind every unsolved disappearance, every cold case, there was a person, real, scared, desperate for justice. The diary's words echoed beyond its pages, a silent scream that refused to be ignored. The discovery of the diary changed the way the city viewed its forgotten victims. It forced officials to confront decades of negligence, corruption, and fear. New investigations were launched, cold cases reopened, and the story of Sarah Whitmore became a rallying cry for truth. In the end, the diary was more than just a relic, it was a warning. A reminder that evil could thrive in silence, but that silence was its greatest weakness. Sarah's voice, captured in fragile ink, was louder than any threat, any shadow. Her story did not end with the diary's discovery. It was just the beginning of a reckoning, a long overdue fight against the darkness that had haunted the city for too long. Elm Street Cemetery was never a place people spoke of lightly. Situated at the edge of a small Midwestern town, it carried a reputation steeped in unease and whispered legends. Locals avoided it after dusk, warning newcomers of restless spirits and dark secrets buried beneath the cracked tombstones. Over the years, stories of strange lights, disembodied voices, and shadows moving against the wind had woven themselves into the town's collective fear. The cemetery had existed since the late 1800s, its oldest graves marked by weathered stones leaning precariously against time. Many of the buried were pioneers, soldiers, and victims of tragic accidents. But it was the unexplained disappearances and mysterious deaths linked to the grounds that truly set Elm Street apart from other cemeteries. In recent decades, Elm Street had become a site of chilling phenomena. Visitors reported hearing footsteps behind them when no one was there, whispers calling out names long forgotten, and cold hands brushing against their skin. More disturbingly, some who ventured too deep into the rows of graves never returned or were found days later, wandering the streets, dazed and unable to speak of what they had seen. A pattern emerged: those who were most affected seemed to have ties to the town's darkest past. They were descendants of families whose ancestors had been involved in a violent feud, an event so brutal it left scars not only on the living but on the ground itself. The feud's origins were murky, but one thing was certain: Elm Street Cemetery had become a battleground between the living and the dead. At the heart of this supernatural unrest was the grave of a man named Jeremiah Kane. He was a recluse who had died under mysterious circumstances in 1924. Rumors claimed he was a practitioner of forbidden rituals, someone who dabbled in the occult to protect his family during turbulent times. His tombstone bore an unusual symbol, etched deeply into the stone, a mark that some believed was a seal to contain whatever darkness he had unleashed. In the months before his death, townsfolk remembered hearing strange chanting from his property, seeing flickering lights and shadowy figures moving unnaturally in the night. After his passing, the disturbances only grew worse. Pets disappeared, crops failed, and people reported nightmares so vivid they bled into waking life. Investigators, skeptical at first, began documenting the phenomena. Equipment malfunctioned inexplicably near Jeremiah's grave. Electronic devices captured low-frequency sounds that resembled guttural voices, and thermal cameras revealed bursts of freezing cold spots where no logical explanation existed. One of the most unsettling discoveries came from a group of paranormal researchers who visited Elm Street Cemetery. During a session aimed at communicating with spirits, they received a chilling message, a warning to leave or suffer the same fate as those already lost. Their recordings contained pleas for help, cries of anguish, and a final, guttural growl that silenced the equipment entirely. The haunting was not limited to the cemetery grounds. Residents living nearby reported doors slamming shut, mirrors cracking spontaneously, and unexplainable scratches appearing on walls. Children spoke of shadowy figures watching them from the edge of their vision. The town's church, once a sanctuary, became a place where even clergy felt uneasy. Despite these warnings, some were drawn to Elm Street Cemetery, driven by curiosity, disbelief, or desperation. They sought answers, proof, or closure for lost loved ones. Few left unchanged. Among the most tragic tales was that of a local man who returned to visit his mother's grave. He entered the cemetery after midnight, carrying a candle and whispered prayers. Hours later, he was found incoherent, wandering along the highway, his clothes torn, his eyes vacant. He never spoke of what had happened but refused to return to the town, eventually disappearing without explanation. Scientists and skeptics attempted to debunk the hauntings as mass hysteria or environmental phenomena. They pointed to toxic gases from decomposing matter causing hallucinations or the power of suggestion twisting ordinary sounds into something sinister. However, their tests revealed no significant environmental hazards, and eyewitness accounts remained consistent and unnerving. The truth seemed buried beneath layers of history, superstition, and pain. Elm Street Cemetery was more than just a resting place for the dead, it was a prison, a battleground, and a warning. Something ancient and malevolent had taken root, fed by the town's darkest secrets and the unresolved suffering of its inhabitants. Every year, as the anniversary of Jeremiah Cain's death approached, the activity intensified. Lights flickered uncontrollably across the graves, shadows writhed beneath the moonlight, and the air grew thick with a suffocating dread. The town held its breath, fearing what might emerge from the darkness. Some believed that the seal on Jeremiah's tombstone was weakening, that the forces he once contained were slipping free. Others whispered that the restless spirit sought justice, revenge, or redemption, but were trapped, unable to move on until their stories were told and their pain acknowledged. Efforts to restore peace had failed repeatedly. Exorcisms performed by visiting clergy were interrupted by violent storms. Archaeological digs intended to relocate remains stirred up more unrest, resulting in injuries and strange illnesses. The cemetery resisted interference, as if alive and protective of its secrets. The haunting at Elm Street Cemetery remains a chilling reminder of the fragile boundary between life and death. It warns that some places, no matter how long abandoned, carry the weight of history's darkest moments. It tells a story of pain, vengeance, and the cost of silence. For the residents, Elm Street is not just a place of mourning but a constant presence, a dark shadow looming at the edge of their lives, where the dead speak in whispers and the past refuses to rest. Detective Mark Harris was known as one of the most dedicated officers in the Cleveland Police Department. His reputation for relentless pursuit of justice was matched only by the mysterious circumstances that surrounded his own disappearance, an event that still haunts the department to this day. Harris was assigned to investigate the growing number of missing persons linked to the Old Warehouse District, a grim area long associated with illicit activities and unexplained vanishings. He had been following a thread that connected several victims, including Ethan Cole and Sarah Whitmore, and was convinced the cases were tied to a larger, darker conspiracy. But then, one day, he simply vanished. It began with subtle changes in Harris's behavior. Colleagues noticed he grew increasingly secretive, refusing to share details of his investigation. He often stayed late at the precinct, poring over files long after others had gone home. His notes became erratic, filled with cryptic references to the Shadow and the Watcher. Some even overheard him muttering about voices no one else could hear. It was as if he was being pulled deeper into something beyond his control. Harris's last known activity involved a clandestine meeting with an informant who claimed to have vital information about Thomas Gray and his network. The informant spoke of hidden rooms beneath the warehouse, secret rituals, and a list of names, people who had disappeared over the years, some allegedly taken to pay for sins they never committed. The informant warned Harris that uncovering the truth would come at a terrible cost. The very next morning, Harris's car was found abandoned on a desolate road near the edge of the warehouse district. The engine was running, his badge and service weapon were inside, but there was no sign of Harris himself. Search teams scoured the area, combing through abandoned buildings and shadowed alleyways, but no trace was ever found. His disappearance became an official missing person case, but the deeper investigators dug, the more questions emerged without answers. Harris had left behind a journal, recovered from his office desk after his disappearance. The pages were filled with notes, diagrams, and unsettling sketches, shadowy figures, eyes watching from darkness, and cryptic symbols similar to those found on Jeremiah Cain's tombstone. His writing was frantic, often crossing out entire paragraphs and rewriting them multiple times. The journal spoke of a force he called the veil, an unseen barrier between the living world and something far more sinister lurking just beyond perception. He wrote about encounters that defied explanation, fleeting glimpses of figures disappearing into walls, whispered warnings in empty rooms, and an overwhelming sense of being hunted. Harris became convinced that the warehouse was a gateway, a place where the boundary between life and death was thin, and that whoever or whatever controlled it was intent on silencing anyone who got too close. One particularly chilling entry described a night when Harris was drawn into a hidden chamber beneath the warehouse. There, he witnessed a gathering, men in dark robes performing a ritual around a sealed door. The ritual, he believed, was meant to keep something imprisoned, but also fed the dark energy that seeped into the surrounding neighborhoods. Harris's fear was palpable in his writing. He warned that breaking the seal could unleash horrors beyond comprehension. As the investigation continued without Harris, his colleagues struggled with their own fears. Some refused to enter the warehouse district alone. Others reported nightmares filled with his voice calling for help. Internal Affairs quietly examined rumors that Harris's disappearance was connected to corruption within the department itself, that certain powerful figures had ties to Thomas Gray and wanted the investigation buried. Years passed, and Harris became a ghost in the department's history. His file was moved to cold case archives, but his name was never forgotten. Occasionally, officers received anonymous tips about his whereabouts, but none led to concrete evidence. Whispers spread of sightings, glimpses of a man in a trench coat watching from the shadows, always just out of reach. The theory that Harris had crossed into the veil took hold among paranormal circles. Some believed he had become trapped between worlds, a living ghost caught in the liminal space he had tried so hard to expose. Others speculated he had been abducted by the same forces behind the disappearances, sacrificed as part of an ongoing dark ritual. Harris's disappearance became a cautionary tale, a warning to those who dared investigate too deeply. His legacy lived on through the few who continued the fight, using his journal as a guide. They knew the risks but felt compelled to finish what he had started. Despite the passage of time, new evidence occasionally surfaced, forgotten recordings, unexplained disturbances in police files, and reports of shadowy figures seen near the warehouse. These fragments hinted that Harris's fate was intertwined with the sinister forces still at work, that the darkness he sought to expose was far from defeated. His disappearance was more than a missing person case, it was a symbol of the battle between light and shadow, truth and oblivion. Detective Mark Harris became a legend, a man who vanished chasing ghosts, caught in a nightmare that refused to end. The unanswered questions remain: did Harris uncover something no one else could? Was he silenced, or did he willingly cross into the darkness? And most terrifyingly, is he still out there, trapped in a world where no help can reach him? Riverside Park had long been considered a quiet refuge in the heart of the city, a place where families gathered on weekends, children played, and joggers followed winding trails along the riverbank. But beneath its serene surface lay a secret that only a few dared to acknowledge. Hidden within the thick underbrush, far from the well-trodden paths, were unmarked graves, dozens of them, whose origins were shrouded in mystery and dread. The discovery came by accident during routine maintenance work. A crew clearing fallen trees unearthed human bones scattered just beneath the soil. Authorities were called, and what followed was a painstaking excavation that revealed the skeletal remains of men, women, and even children. None of the graves bore markers, and forensic analysis showed that many of the bodies had been buried hastily, their deaths violent and sudden. The unmarked graves traced back decades, possibly as far as the early 20th century. Historians speculated these were victims of forgotten tragedies, orphans, victims of epidemics, or casualties of the city's darker chapters. But whispers among locals suggested a more sinister truth. Rumors spoke of bodies buried to hide evidence of crimes committed by those in power, swept away from public scrutiny. The park's peaceful reputation began to crumble as the story spread. Visitors reported eerie sensations near the burial sites, a sense of being watched, sudden chills, and unexplainable sounds drifting through the trees. Some swore they saw shadowy figures moving between the branches, vanishing when approached. Among the remains found were artifacts that deepened the mystery, pieces of torn clothing, old coins, and fragments of what looked like ritualistic symbols etched onto small stones. The implication was clear: these were not just forgotten victims but part of something darker, a secret kept hidden by the city's elite. Local law enforcement reopened cold cases that might connect to the unmarked graves. They discovered records of several missing persons who had vanished without explanation over the years, many with ties to criminal investigations that were abruptly closed. The pattern was chilling: people who got too close to exposing corruption or wrongdoing disappeared without a trace. Further investigation revealed that Riverside Park sat atop what was once a forgotten burial ground for marginalized communities, immigrants, the poor, and the mentally ill, whose lives had been disregarded even in death. Over time, as the city expanded, the graves were covered by soil and forgotten, replaced by manicured lawns and playgrounds. But the unrest in the park suggested these souls had not found peace. Some believed the unmarked graves were the source of a lingering curse, a collective outcry from those denied justice in life and death. Paranormal experts who visited reported feelings of oppression, objects moving on their own, and cold spots that defied explanation. The most unsettling accounts came from night watchmen assigned to patrol the park. They described encounters with ghostly apparitions that stared with hollow eyes, silently pleading. One guard recounted waking to find fresh dirt disturbed near the graves, as if something, or someone, had recently been buried. Efforts to properly memorialize the graves sparked controversy. Some community leaders pushed for recognition and respect, while others feared stirring up the dark energies tied to the site. The city council faced pressure to investigate further, but many preferred to leave the past buried, fearing what might emerge if it were disturbed. The unmarked graves also attracted the attention of occult groups drawn to the symbols found among the remains. These groups performed rituals attempting to communicate with the spirits, hoping to harness the power they believed lingered. But these ceremonies often ended in chaos. Participants reported sudden illnesses, visions of shadowy figures, and unexplained accidents. The boundary between the living world and whatever haunted Riverside Park grew thinner each year. The park's natural beauty became a haunting mask, hiding a restless undercurrent of sorrow and rage. Families who once found solace there now avoided the park after dark, wary of the invisible forces that seemed to watch from the shadows. For some, the unmarked graves were a stark reminder of how easily society can erase the forgotten, leaving their stories untold and their spirits unrest. The park was not just a place of leisure, it was a silent witness to injustice, a place where the past demanded acknowledgement and retribution. The city remains divided over what to do with Riverside Park's dark secret. While some advocate for excavation and memorialization, others fear that disturbing the graves could unleash something far worse than memories, something that had already begun to seep into the city's fabric. The unmarked graves serve as a chilling testament to lives lost and secrets buried. They warn that beneath the surface of ordinary places, horrors can lie hidden, waiting for the curious or the reckless to uncover them. The silent witnesses were everywhere: objects, remnants, traces of lives once vibrant but now frozen in time. Among the chilling discoveries at Riverside Park, the most unnerving were those that seemed to carry stories of horror and despair, as if the very things left behind held a consciousness of their own. These silent witnesses spoke in silence, their presence a constant reminder of the truth no one wanted to face. Scattered among the unmarked graves were personal belongings, jewelry, buttons, tattered pieces of fabric, and old photographs, yellowed with age but hauntingly clear. Each item was a fragment of a person, a shard of a life violently interrupted. Some bore signs of trauma: splintered wood from broken picture frames, cracked glass, bent jewelry twisted in anguish. These relics were testimonies to the pain endured, silent but heavy with meaning. Forensic experts catalogued these items meticulously, hoping to find clues that could identify the victims. But beyond their practical purpose, these objects seemed to exert an inexplicable influence on those who came into contact with them. Many staff members reported a deep, oppressive feeling when handling the belongings, a sensation described as bearing the weight of sorrow. Among the most disturbing finds were old letters and journals buried alongside the remains. Their ink had faded but not erased the desperate words penned by hands that had long since turned to dust. The writings spoke of fear, isolation, and a hopeless cry for help. One journal belonged to a young woman who described being held captive in a makeshift prison beneath the city, hidden from view. She wrote of unspeakable horrors and of a shadowy figure she called the Watcher, who guarded the secret underground chambers. The Watcher appeared repeatedly in multiple accounts, a ghostly presence with cold eyes that never blinked, silently observing without emotion. Survivors, those rare few who escaped the clutches of the darkness, described feeling watched wherever they went, their lives forever marked by the trauma inflicted. They believed the Watcher was not just a person but an embodiment of the evil tied to the buried graves. In addition to these physical silent witnesses, there were the witnesses who could not speak, the trees surrounding the burial sites. Ancient oaks and elms stood as somber sentinels, their twisted branches whispering with the wind. Locals claimed these trees seemed to bleed during storms, dark sap oozing like tears. Some said the trees absorbed the anguish of the buried souls, their roots tangled in the remains, forever entwined with the park's dark history. The trees also served as a boundary, a natural barrier between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Those who ventured too close reported an overwhelming sense of dread, as if the trees themselves were warning against intrusion. Many said they heard faint cries, desperate whispers carried on the breeze, but no matter how hard they listened, the voices remained just out of reach. The park bench closest to the largest cluster of graves became known as the Silent Witness. It was old and worn, its wood scarred by time and weather. Those who sat there spoke of a heavy silence that pressed down, an oppressive stillness that weighed on their minds. Some visitors claimed the bench was warm to the touch despite cold weather, as though alive with residual energy. Others reported seeing fleeting reflections of faces in its grain, faces of the lost, pleading for remembrance. The silent witnesses extended beyond the park. In the nearby neighborhoods, families reported strange phenomena, lights flickering inexplicably, distant echoes of children's laughter in the dead of night, and shadows crossing windows without source. The presence seemed to seep from the park into the city, a reminder that the buried horrors were not confined to one place. Even the police precinct, once a bastion of safety, felt the weight of these silent witnesses. Officers assigned to the missing persons cases connected to Riverside Park grew increasingly unsettled. Some resigned, citing an inability to escape the oppressive atmosphere. Those who stayed reported nightmares so vivid they felt real, dreams where the buried called out for justice, accusing the living of forgetting them. Investigators found that the silent witnesses had a way of revealing truths that human eyes could not. Photos taken near the graves often captured unexplained orbs of light, shadowy figures lurking at the edges of frames, or sudden distortions that no one could explain. Audio recordings sometimes caught faint whispers, unintelligible but unmistakably human. These phenomena fueled speculation that the silent witnesses were more than relics, they were the keepers of memory, guardians of secrets waiting to be unveiled. The community remained divided. Some feared the silent witnesses, seeing them as curses or signs of lingering evil. Others believed they were a call to action, a demand that the forgotten victims be acknowledged, that the injustices buried with them be brought into the light. Activists pushed for memorials and ceremonies to honor those lost, hoping that recognition would soothe restless spirits. Yet the silent witnesses resisted silence. Objects continued to appear where none had been placed, scratches marked on benches and trees, faint voices echoing in empty spaces. It was as if the very ground beneath Riverside Park was alive with memory, refusing to be erased. The silent witnesses carried a lesson, one of remembrance and reckoning. They warned that some truths, no matter how deeply buried, will always find a way to be heard. And that the past, when ignored or concealed, has a way of reaching into the present, demanding justice, demanding recognition, demanding that the silent finally be given a voice. The days that followed were defined by a strange quiet, the kind that doesn't bring peace but rather thickens the air with questions that no one is willing to voice. The authorities had sealed off the building, citing structural concerns, but those who lived nearby whispered about the sirens that had blared for hours and the stretchers that left covered in black plastic. Curiosity lingered like smoke, but fear did a better job of keeping people away. What was once considered a forgotten, run-down property was now something else entirely, a place people crossed the street to avoid, even in daylight. The local police precinct remained tight-lipped, feeding the media only neutral statements that offered no real insight. Officially, it was a possible multiple homicide under investigation. Unofficially, everyone who mattered wanted the case buried. Whatever they found down there wasn't meant for public consumption. Those involved, the ones who had seen it with their own eyes, weren't the same. One officer reportedly resigned the next day and moved out of state. Another stopped answering calls. A third began frequenting a local church every morning, eyes sunken, voice flat. The story they carried wasn't something words could handle. The building's ownership trail vanished into a paper fog, LLCs registered to dead people, contact numbers that reached empty offices, and business addresses that didn't exist. Every lead collapsed into silence. There were whispers of government involvement, but even conspiracy theorists kept their distance. Not because they didn't believe something horrific had happened, but because for once, they didn't want to know the truth. A month passed. A young journalist from a regional outlet began piecing things together from the shadows, gathering interviews with tenants, construction workers, and local vendors who had seen more than they admitted. He wrote a blog post, nothing sensational, just fragments, questions, theories. Within 48 hours, the post vanished. His account was deactivated, his contact information scrubbed, and his phone went dark. No missing person report was filed, because no one could confirm where he lived or who he worked for. It was as if the ground swallowed him whole. The building remained untouched, a derelict husk wrapped in caution tape that never fluttered, not even in the wind. People claimed they heard movement inside, the kind that didn't sound like rats or structural settling. More than one homeless man who sought shelter near the entrance had disappeared, leaving behind only carts or bedrolls. But there was no investigation. No one filed missing person reports for them. Their absence was just one more shadow added to a place already swallowed in darkness. Down the street, an elderly man who had lived in the neighborhood for 4 decades began making rounds with a handheld tape recorder. He would speak into it while standing in front of the building, muttering cryptic sentences, phrases like, "It's still feeding," or, "They shouldn't have opened it." He wasn't homeless. He had a home. He had family. But within weeks, his mind began unraveling publicly. When someone finally took the recorder from him, it was filled with hours of static, except for one clear moment where a child's voice whispered, "He's watching." The whispers began to spread beyond the city. Paranormal investigators showed up with their gear, hoping for a glimpse, a reading, a soundbite they could take back to their channels. None of them stayed longer than one night. One group left so fast they abandoned a $3,000 thermal camera. Another was found sitting in their van, engine running, eyes locked forward, unresponsive for hours. When they finally spoke, they didn't describe ghosts or cold spots or flickering lights. Instead, they all repeated the same phrase, "The air moved wrong." Eventually, the city moved to demolish the building. Contractors arrived one morning, flanked by police and officials who signed waivers that cleared all liability. Equipment was brought in, cranes, bulldozers, hydraulic shears. But the machines wouldn't start. Every battery was dead, every fuel tank drained, despite being inspected the day before. When backup generators were brought in, the power surged once and then collapsed, frying the entire electrical setup. The city made one last push, but then quietly canceled the demolition without a word. No statement. No press release. Just silence. A fence went up. Not a cheap chain link one, but heavy iron with welded joints and razor wire, the kind normally reserved for military bases or classified government facilities. Motion sensors were added, as were infrared cameras. No one spoke about it. But the message was clear, stay away. Months turned into a year. The building remained untouched, sealed from the world. But its presence spread. People who had lived nearby reported vivid nightmares, always the same theme, endless hallways, locked doors, walls that whispered. Some claimed they heard their own names being called from behind their mirrors. Others found smudges on their windows in the shape of small, human hands, even though no children lived in the area. The fear was no longer contained. Whatever was inside had seeped out, invisible but persistent. The neighborhood began to change. Stores closed early. Children were no longer allowed to play outside. Real estate listings disappeared. The city rerouted bus lines to avoid the block entirely. And amid all this change, the building stood quietly, decaying, watching, waiting. And somewhere deep within its walls, something moved. The fence didn't stop the neighborhood from unraveling. It only served as a symbolic boundary between what the city still controlled and what it had given up on. Businesses that once thrived within a few blocks of the building began reporting strange malfunctions. Security systems triggered without cause, lights flickered in patterns that formed repeating sequences, and electronic registers failed to log transactions that everyone witnessed take place. The reports were filed, but the system didn't register them. It was as if that square mile had become a blank space where logic dissolved. Families quietly packed their things and left. Some skipped out on their leases or mortgages entirely. They cited vague reasons, bad energy, strange dreams, a feeling we weren't alone. Others didn't say anything at all, just vanished overnight. The local post office started returning more and more mail labeled undeliverable or resident moved, no forwarding address. Streets that once bustled with late-night activity emptied, and within 6 months, the neighborhood felt like a shell of its former self. The city sent out reassessment notices. Property values plummeted, but buyers stopped responding to listings. The once lucrative development plans that had surrounded the area were abandoned. No investors returned calls. The land became worthless, not because of economics, but because something intangible had taken root. No one wanted to build near a place where silence had mass and darkness had a scent. Surveyors refused to approach the building even for insurance purposes. Drones deployed to capture footage returned with corrupted memory cards or didn't return at all. Records surfaced, unintentionally. An internal city memo leaked online, briefly gaining attention before being buried under threats of legal action. It referenced an off-the-books task force assigned to the building years before its most recent incident. Their purpose had not been to investigate but to observe. The report mentioned unquantifiable anomalies, unexplained electromagnetic fields, and temporal inconsistencies. One excerpt simply read, "It is not just a structure. It is a wound." This revelation was met with the usual public mixture of fear, disbelief, and fascination. But unlike typical viral content, it didn't spawn challenges or tourism. It bred silence. Forums that tried to discuss the topic experienced sudden outages. YouTube creators who posted about the building found their videos demonetized, removed, or silently suppressed by the algorithm. Reddit threads would vanish mid-conversation, and attempts to repost were met with automatic bans. No official reason was ever given. The weather around the block began to shift. Rain fell harder within that square mile, even during clear skies. Clouds seemed to hang lower, casting an unnatural pallor over the area. The air was heavier, like walking through static. Some pedestrians who ventured too close described feeling disoriented, as though time skipped for a fraction of a second or the world tilted slightly. One woman claimed her smartwatch jumped ahead 20 minutes during a 10-second walk past the alley. Utility workers became superstitious. No one volunteered to repair electrical faults or gas lines near the building. A work crew assigned to inspect a sewer main refused to go underground, citing unexplained heat rising from the manholes despite freezing winter temperatures. One worker described hearing the unmistakable sound of children laughing beneath the pavement, followed by a heavy, dragging sound, as though something was being pulled through narrow spaces. Hospitals within a few miles reported a spike in unexplained psychological episodes. Patients admitted for routine issues experienced hallucinations, particularly during the night shift. Nurses described entire wings falling dead silent at exactly 3:13 a.m., followed by synchronized power drops that left equipment blinking red. A psychiatrist from one clinic recorded more than 24 patients reporting the same dream, a tall, faceless figure standing in the hallway of a decrepit building, pointing at a door that none of them were willing to open. Emergency calls increased, but none could be confirmed. Dispatch logs were filled with hang-ups, distorted audio, or what sounded like children crying and whispering nonsense phrases. In every case, the origin was traced to a single cell tower serving the block that housed the building. Attempts to disable the tower failed. Technicians discovered the base station had been modified with equipment that didn't match any known manufacturer. No one claimed responsibility. Eventually, the block became what locals referred to only as the quiet zone. Cars didn't pass through. Deliveries were rerouted. GPS apps began diverting traffic around the area automatically, even when users entered specific addresses inside it. No update had triggered this change. The system simply began recognizing it as inaccessible. Rideshare drivers wouldn't accept pickups or drop-offs anywhere near it. Food delivery apps marked it as service unavailable. Even birds seemed to avoid flying overhead. Wildlife grew still. Plants refused to grow near the foundation. Not even weeds emerged through the cracks in the concrete, as though the very earth rejected the structure it once supported. What remained was an empty space in the heart of the city. A black spot on the map that no one acknowledged but everyone feared. It was no longer just a building. It was an infection that had begun to spread, not through contact, but through awareness. Those who knew of it, who thought about it, who obsessed over it, felt it creeping into their lives like mold on a wall. And still, beneath the rusting iron fence, something continued to breathe. Beneath the sprawling cityscape, under layers of asphalt and concrete, a network of forgotten tunnels and catacombs sprawled in shadowed silence. These underground passages, relics of a bygone era, had once served practical purposes: sewers, smuggling routes, secret passages, but over time they became more than mere infrastructure. They turned into graves, hiding places, and repositories of secrets too dark to surface. It was here, beneath the city's bustling streets, that the darkest whispers began. Stories told of muffled cries carried through the vents, the faint scraping of unseen claws against cold stone, and flickering lights that danced in abandoned shafts. People who worked near the tunnels, maintenance crews, homeless squatters, curious urban explorers, spoke of an oppressive presence, something lurking just beyond the edge of perception. The city officials had long denied the existence of these whispers. To admit otherwise would mean acknowledging a legacy of corruption, cover-ups, and unpunished crimes buried deep beneath their feet. But no denial could silence the growing unease spreading through those who dared to venture into the subterranean maze. The tunnels were littered with relics that hinted at their sinister past: rusted chains, shards of broken glass, discarded personal belongings stained with blood, and cryptic messages scrawled on walls in desperate handwriting. The graffiti was often illegible, but some symbols repeated with unnerving consistency: circles crossed by lines, inverted crosses, and cryptic numbers that seemed to map out something sinister. One of the most chilling discoveries was a hidden chamber, sealed off for decades, containing evidence of ritualistic killings. Candles melted into pools of wax on the floor, bones arranged in disturbing patterns, and a makeshift altar stained dark with old blood. The chamber suggested a cult operating beneath the city, feeding on fear and secrecy, their victims left to rot in the shadows. The investigation into the tunnels uncovered a series of disappearances spanning decades, individuals who vanished without a trace, their last known locations linked to entrances near the catacombs. Witnesses claimed to have seen figures dragging victims into manholes, never to be seen again. The disappearances were dismissed as urban myths by authorities, but the patterns were undeniable. The underground network seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, as if the very stones had absorbed the suffering of those lost within. Electrical equipment malfunctioned inexplicably, radios emitted static punctuated by whispering voices, even the bravest explorers reported feelings of paralysis and overwhelming dread. The local homeless population, many of whom used the tunnels for shelter, were particularly vulnerable. Some spoke of the Watchers, shadowy beings said to guard the tunnels, punishing those who trespassed too deep. Stories circulated of people disappearing overnight, leaving behind only empty sleeping bags and a lingering scent of decay. Psychologists studying these reports speculated that the fear and isolation of the tunnels manifested in hallucinations and collective hysteria. Yet the consistency and detail of the accounts suggested something more, something real and horrifying lurking in the darkness. The city's police force formed a special task unit to explore the tunnels systematically. Equipped with cameras, sensors, and communication devices, teams ventured into the labyrinth with strict protocols. But even the technology failed them. Cameras captured fleeting shadows moving against the walls, sensors registered unexplained cold spots, radios picked up distorted voices pleading for help. Reports from the teams grew increasingly disturbing. Officers spoke of hearing footsteps following them, whispers calling their names, and an overwhelming sense of being hunted. Several members of the unit left the force soon after, citing mental breakdowns and persistent nightmares that haunted their waking hours. One officer's journal revealed a terrifying descent into madness. He described encounters with figures that blended into the darkness, eyes glowing faintly, mouths twisted in silent screams. He wrote of being trapped in a loop, unable to find exits, the tunnels shifting around him as if alive. His last entry was a desperate plea for rescue, abruptly cut off. The tunnel's influence seemed to extend beyond those who physically entered them. Nearby residents reported strange phenomena, pets refusing to enter basements, sudden drops in temperature, and electrical devices failing without cause. Children played near manhole covers and claimed to see shadowy figures watching from below. Paranormal investigators were drawn to the site, performing vigils and rituals to cleanse the space. Yet their efforts often ended in failure, ritual implements shattered, equipment malfunctioned, and some participants experienced terrifying visions or fainted. Many left convinced that whatever dwelled beneath the city was beyond human understanding. The city council remained hesitant to act. Acknowledging the tunnel's dark secrets risked damaging the city's reputation and inviting unwanted scrutiny. Officials insisted that the tunnels were simply old infrastructure, urging citizens to ignore rumors and avoid entering restricted areas. But the whispers beneath the concrete refused to be silenced. They carried the voices of the forgotten, the lost, and the damned, those who had fallen victim to hidden evils concealed beneath layers of stone and secrecy. The tunnels were a reminder that beneath the surface of civilization, darkness thrives, waiting for the next unwary soul to stumble into its grasp. The city's pulse quickened whenever storms raged, flooding the tunnels with water and stirring the stagnant air. On those nights, the whispers grew louder, echoing through manholes and sewer grates, as if the underground world itself cried out in pain and rage. The underground labyrinth was a mirror of the city above, a place where corruption festered, justice was denied, and the innocent suffered in silence. It was a physical embodiment of buried sins, a darkness impossible to ignore. The question remained, how long before the whispers beneath the concrete broke through the surface, dragging the city's darkest secrets into the light? The vanishing light was not just a flicker or a momentary blackout, it was an ominous phenomenon that marked the beginning of something far more sinister. Residents across the city began to report strange occurrences, streetlights extinguishing one by one, entire blocks plunging into darkness without explanation. The darkness was thick and unnatural, swallowing the familiar glow of the city and leaving behind a suffocating void. At first, authorities dismissed the reports as electrical failures or weather-related outages. But technicians found no faults in the grid, no signs of sabotage or wear. The outages were localized, precise, and seemed to follow a pattern, moving systematically through neighborhoods with eerie predictability. The vanishing light coincided with an increase in disappearances and unexplained phenomena. People vanished from their homes during these blackouts, their last moments often recorded on security cameras showing only a sudden loss of power before nothing but darkness remained. Witnesses spoke of feeling an oppressive presence just before the lights went out, as if some invisible force was watching, waiting. Emergency services were overwhelmed, unable to respond effectively when entire areas were plunged into darkness. Communication lines faltered, radios went silent, and even mobile devices lost signal. The city became fractured, an island of light surrounded by encroaching shadows. Researchers studying the outages theorized a connection to the underground tunnels and the dark forces rumored to dwell beneath the city. The timing, the locations, and the pattern all pointed to something orchestrated, a slow creeping shadow reaching upward from the depths. The vanishing light was more than a physical absence of illumination, it was a harbinger of fear. Those caught in the blackouts described sensations of paralysis, cold fingers brushing their skin, and whispers just beyond hearing. Some spoke of seeing figures standing in the dark, their outlines barely visible, eyes gleaming with malevolence. Psychological distress spiked. Anxiety and paranoia gripped neighborhoods, with residents barricading themselves indoors and avoiding venturing out after sunset. The dark became a prison, and the vanishing light a relentless predator stalking its prey. Urban legends surged. Stories spread of a being known only as the Shade, a creature that fed on darkness and despair, growing stronger each time the city's light faltered. The Shade was said to be born in the tunnels, a twisted manifestation of the city's buried sins and forgotten victims. The Shade's influence reached beyond the physical. Those who encountered it reported sudden personality changes, withdrawal, aggression, and in some cases, violent outbursts. Families fractured, friendships dissolved, and communities fractured under the weight of unseen terror. Attempts to restore normalcy failed. Emergency crews equipped with generators and flashlights found their efforts thwarted by inexplicable interference, batteries drained instantly, equipment malfunctioned, and light sources flickered before dying. It was as if the darkness consumed not just light but the very tools used to combat it. The vanishing light also affected the natural world. Birds ceased their songs at dusk, pets became restless and aggressive, and plants wilted without apparent cause. The environment seemed to recoil, reacting to the presence of the darkness with fear and decay. Amid the chaos, a small group of investigators emerged, determined to uncover the truth behind the vanishing light. They gathered evidence, mapped the patterns, and searched for any connection to the city's darkest corners. Their research pointed to a nexus deep within the underground tunnels, a place where the boundary between the physical world and something otherworldly was thinnest. The nexus was said to be a point of convergence for dark energy, a wellspring of malevolence that fed on fear and sorrow. It pulsed with a cold light of its own, a dim glow that seemed to consume all surrounding brightness. Some believed it was the source of the vanishing light, the heart of the darkness spreading across the city. The investigators' efforts were met with resistance, both from skeptical officials reluctant to acknowledge supernatural explanations, and from forces beyond comprehension. Several team members experienced unexplained illnesses, accidents, and disappearances, reinforcing the idea that the darkness protected its secrets fiercely. Despite the mounting dangers, the investigators pressed on, driven by a sense of duty and a desperate hope to reclaim the city's light. They believed that exposing the truth might break the cycle of darkness, that bringing the hidden into daylight would weaken the vanishing light's grip. But as the darkness spread, consuming more of the city with each passing night, the question remained, was it too late? Had the vanishing light already claimed too much, too many souls lost to the shadows? The city stood on the edge of oblivion, its heart beating in time with the fading glow. The vanishing light was more than a threat, it was a warning. A reminder that darkness, once unleashed, does not simply disappear, it devours. The broken circle was more than a symbol, it was a curse etched into the fabric of the city's darkest secrets. It appeared everywhere, the walls of abandoned buildings, scratched into the concrete floors of forgotten basements, traced with trembling hands in the dust of sealed rooms. No one knew its origin, but those who recognized it understood the warning it carried. Ancient and enigmatic, the broken circle was said to mark the boundaries of a malevolent force's domain. It represented a shattered unity, a breach in the natural order, and the fracture between worlds that should never have met. Its jagged edges symbolized broken promises, betrayals, and the violence that had torn the city's hidden history apart. The first sightings coincided with the vanishing light. Wherever the darkness spread, the broken circle followed, like a scar left behind by something unseen but deeply felt. People who stumbled upon the symbol reported sudden chills, an overwhelming sense of dread, and sometimes even physical illness. The mark was a beacon for the unseen horrors that lurked beneath. Legends told of a secret society, once powerful and respected, who had delved too deeply into forbidden knowledge. They sought to harness the underground darkness for their own ends, using rituals and ancient texts to control forces beyond human understanding. But their arrogance shattered the balance, breaking the circle of protection that separated the natural world from the abyss. The society vanished decades ago, erased from official records and public memory. But their legacy endured in the broken circle, a stain on the city's soul that allowed darkness to seep through the cracks. Whispers spoke of surviving members, shadows in the night who still walked among the living, guarding secrets and perpetuating the curse. Investigators piecing together the city's dark past uncovered fragmented accounts of these rituals, describing how the broken circle was once a perfect ring, a seal against evil. When broken, it became a gateway, an invitation for the horrors below to rise. The consequences were catastrophic: disappearances, madness, violent deaths, and the relentless spread of fear. The broken circle also appeared in the personal histories of many missing persons and victims. Tattoos, birthmarks, and drawings linked to the symbol were discovered among the belongings of those who vanished. Some survivors recounted dreams of being trapped inside the circle, unable to escape as shadows closed in from all sides. Researchers theorized that the broken circle functioned as a trap, ensnaring souls in an endless limbo between life and death. Those caught within its boundaries were said to hear the whispers of the dead and see visions of horrors too terrible to describe. The line between reality and nightmare blurred until the mind shattered. As the symbol spread, so too did the city's paranoia. Communities isolated themselves, neighbors distrusted one another, and fear poisoned everyday life. The broken circle became a sign of impending doom, appearing overnight on doorsteps, windows, and mailboxes, like a curse targeting anyone who encountered it. Law enforcement found themselves powerless. Attempts to remove or destroy the symbol failed. The markings would reappear, often in more disturbing forms. Cleaning crews refused to enter areas marked by the broken circle, citing unexplained sickness and feelings of terror. Even those tasked with removing graffiti felt watched and followed. Some saw the broken circle as a challenge, a test of courage and sanity. Thrill seekers and occult enthusiasts ventured into marked zones, searching for answers or proof of the supernatural. Many never returned, their disappearances adding fuel to the ever-growing legend. The symbol's presence also seemed to affect technology. Cameras malfunctioned, recording only static or distorted images when pointed at the broken circle. Audio devices captured strange frequencies, low hums, and garbled voices, as if the symbol itself was a transmitter for something beyond human comprehension. The broken circle was not just a mark, it was a presence, a force that warped reality. Time seemed to distort within its boundaries, minutes stretched into hours, and some who entered lost track of days or years. Memory failed, and identities faded, swallowed by the endless darkness that followed the broken seal. A few brave souls tried to trace the origins of the broken circle, delving into historical archives and forbidden texts. They discovered that the symbol appeared in other cities and cultures, always associated with calamity and supernatural terror. Its meaning varied, but the consequences were always the same: madness, disappearance, and death. In the present day, the broken circle had become a rallying point for those fighting against the encroaching darkness. Underground groups formed, combining expertise in history, science, and the paranormal. They sought to understand the symbol and find a way to repair the broken seal. However, their efforts were hindered by internal distrust and external threats. Members disappeared without explanation, documents were stolen or destroyed, and communication was constantly intercepted. It was as if some unseen power actively resisted any attempt to reverse the curse. The broken circle was a constant reminder that the city's nightmare was far from over. It represented the fracture not only in the physical world but in the human spirit, the broken trust, the hidden sins, and the horrors that festered beneath the surface. To confront the broken circle was to confront the city's darkest history, to acknowledge the sins that had been buried and the forces that had been unleashed. It was a dangerous path, but one that might hold the key to salvation, or total destruction. The question lingered: could the circle be mended before the darkness consumed everything, or was the city destined to live forever under the shadow of the broken circle? Echoes of the forgotten were not mere sounds, they were the restless voices of those who had vanished, trapped between worlds, their stories erased from history yet lingering in the shadows. These echoes reverberated through the city's darkest corners, carrying with them whispers of pain, betrayal, and unfinished business. They were a haunting reminder of the price paid for secrets kept and sins ignored. The forgotten were not just victims, they were witnesses to horrors beyond human comprehension. Their memories, fractured and distorted, slipped through cracks in time, reaching out to those willing to listen. Some heard these echoes as faint murmurs in the wind, others experienced them as vivid visions or fleeting sensations of being watched. The echoes came with no warning, slipping into the quiet moments when the city seemed most alive yet most vulnerable. They surfaced in abandoned buildings, underground tunnels, and places marked by the broken circle. Sometimes they invaded dreams, turning sleep into a battleground between memory and oblivion. Those who encountered the echoes often found themselves drawn deeper into the mystery. Names, dates, and locations flickered in their minds like ghostly fragments, urging them to uncover truths long buried. The echoes were like a puzzle, disjointed pieces that, when assembled, revealed a story of corruption, sacrifice, and darkness that had plagued the city for generations. The voices spoke of a time when the city was different, before the vanishing light and the broken circle. They told of a secret pact made in desperation, a bargain struck between men desperate for power and forces that should never have been called. This pact had shattered the city's soul, unleashing a curse that twisted fate and doomed countless lives. Some echoes were cries for justice, seeking to expose those responsible for the tragedies that had been swept under the rug. Others were warnings, desperate attempts to prevent the past from repeating itself. But many were trapped in torment, unable to find peace, their stories lost to the shadows that claimed them. Researchers and investigators tried to capture the echoes, using technology and ritual in hopes of giving voice to the forgotten. Recordings captured strange noises, unintelligible whispers, guttural cries, and occasional clear words that sent chills down the spine. These fragments, though incomplete, painted a picture of a city haunted by its own history. The echoes seemed to respond to emotions, growing louder near fear, sorrow, and anger. They fed on the pain of the living as much as the dead, intertwining their fate with the city's collective psyche. This symbiotic relationship made the echoes both a curse and a guide, revealing hidden truths while dragging listeners toward madness. Certain individuals became attuned to the echoes, developing an unsettling sensitivity. They could hear voices others could not, see shadows where none existed, and feel presences beyond explanation. These people were often ostracized, labeled as unstable or dangerous, yet they held keys to unraveling the city's dark mysteries. Some attempted to use the echoes as a means of communication, establishing tenuous connections with the forgotten. Through seances, EVP sessions, and other occult methods, they sought answers. Occasionally, clear messages emerged, names of victims, locations of hidden evidence, and warnings of impending danger. However, the echoes were not always benevolent. Misinterpretations and manipulations led to tragic outcomes, false leads, wrongful accusations, and increased paranoia. The city's fragile social fabric frayed under the weight of these unseen forces, driving wedges between neighbors and allies alike. The echoes also revealed that the vanished were not simply missing, they were caught in a liminal space where time and reality folded in on itself. This space was a mirror of the city, dark and distorted, where memories twisted into nightmares and hope withered beneath an endless twilight. Attempts to rescue the forgotten or retrieve lost souls met with failure. The echoes warned that interference could strengthen the darkness, pulling more victims into the void. It was a delicate balance, one that required understanding, respect, and caution. Legends grew around those who dared to confront the echoes. Some were said to have vanished, consumed by the very voices they sought to understand. Others emerged changed, their minds fractured but holding fragments of forbidden knowledge that haunted them forever. The city itself seemed to pulse with the energy of the echoes, a living entity feeding on forgotten pain. This energy manifested in unpredictable ways, sudden chills, inexplicable shadows, and a pervasive feeling of unease that seeped into everyday life. The forgotten were never truly gone, they were woven into the city's very essence. In the face of these revelations, hope flickered. The echoes suggested that redemption might be possible, that the cycle of darkness could be broken if the city confronted its past honestly and without fear. Healing required acknowledging the forgotten, giving voice to the silenced, and mending the broken circle. Yet, the path was treacherous. The echoes warned that some truths were too dangerous, that the darkness guarding these secrets was relentless and unforgiving. Only those with unwavering resolve and courage could face the full weight of what lay beneath. As the city braced for what was to come, the echoes of the forgotten grew louder, a chorus of souls reaching out from the void. Their stories demanded to be heard, their pain refused to be ignored. The forgotten had become the city's conscience, a haunting reminder that the past never truly dies. The broken circle might have shattered the seal, but the echoes carried the promise of reckoning. The city stood at a crossroads, between succumbing to eternal darkness or rising to reclaim its light. The voices of the forgotten were the final call, a summons to confront the shadows and break the cycle before it consumed everything. Shadows among us were more than fleeting darkness, they were manifestations of fear, guilt, and secrets lurking just beyond perception. They moved silently, blending seamlessly into everyday life, hiding in plain sight. These shadows were neither entirely physical nor wholly spiritual, they existed in the unsettling space between reality and nightmare. Their presence was felt rather than seen, a weight pressing on the chest, a cold breath on the neck, or the unmistakable sensation of being watched. People spoke in hushed tones about sudden chills in warm rooms, fleeting shapes out of the corner of their eyes, and unexplained sounds that defied logic. The shadows had no mercy, they preyed on doubt, tormenting the vulnerable and the guilty alike. Those who encountered these shadows described a creeping dread that seeped into their bones, eroding sanity one quiet moment at a time. The shadows fed on secrets, growing stronger with every lie told and every sin buried deep within. They were reflections of the city's hidden darkness, its sins personified. The origins of these shadows were as elusive as their form. Some believed they were remnants of the broken circle's curse, echoes of the forbidden rituals that tore the veil between worlds. Others thought they were the twisted souls of those lost to the abyss, condemned to wander without rest. Whatever their true nature, the shadows were relentless and unforgiving. Communities affected by the shadows saw a rise in paranoia and suspicion. Neighbors who once trusted each other now eyed one another warily. Friendships fractured under the strain of unseen threats, and families were torn apart by unexplained disappearances and sudden bouts of madness. The shadows thrived on this chaos, feeding on the fractures in human connection. Technology offered no refuge. Cameras caught only fleeting blurs, and audio recordings captured distorted noises that defied explanation. Attempts to track or trap the shadows failed repeatedly, as if they existed just beyond the reach of science and reason. Even devices designed to detect electromagnetic anomalies found only static and silence. The shadows had an uncanny ability to imitate. They mimicked voices of loved ones, replicated familiar movements, and manipulated light and sound to deceive their victims. This mimicry sowed confusion, blurring the line between reality and delusion. Victims questioned their own perceptions, unsure if what they experienced was real or a product of their unraveling minds. Psychologists and paranormal investigators documented patterns in the shadows' behavior. They noted that the shadows targeted those with unresolved guilt or trauma, amplifying their fears until they became prisoners of their own minds. The shadows were not random, they sought out those whose inner darkness mirrored their own. A disturbing trend emerged: those haunted by shadows often displayed erratic behavior, withdrawing from social life and succumbing to despair. Some disappeared entirely, vanishing without a trace. Others were found days or weeks later, wandering in a dazed state, their memories fractured and their eyes void of recognition. Efforts to combat the shadows ranged from religious rituals to scientific experiments. Some turned to prayer, hoping faith could ward off the encroaching darkness. Others embraced technology, attempting to map the shadows' movements and disrupt their presence. Neither approach yielded lasting results, as the shadows adapted and persisted. Stories circulated about individuals who had seemingly negotiated with the shadows, striking bargains or making sacrifices to escape their torment. These tales were cautionary, warning that such pacts came at a terrible cost. Those who bargained often lost more than they gained, becoming vessels for the shadows' will or disappearing into the void themselves. The shadows were not mindless entities, they were cunning and patient, weaving themselves into the fabric of daily life. They exploited moments of weakness, hesitation, and fear, turning the ordinary into a battleground for survival. No one was truly safe, everyone carried shadows within. As the city grappled with this pervasive darkness, a growing movement arose among those determined to fight back. They formed clandestine groups, sharing knowledge and resources, seeking ways to expose and banish the shadows. These fighters believed that understanding the shadows' nature was key to reclaiming the city's soul. Yet, the deeper they delved, the more they realized the shadows were intertwined with the city's identity. To eradicate them meant confronting uncomfortable truths about human nature, the legacy of betrayal, and the consequences of hidden sins. The fight against the shadows was not just external, it was a battle within. The shadows were a mirror, reflecting what the city refused to face. They revealed cracks in society's foundation, broken promises, corruption, and the erosion of trust. To defeat them required unity, honesty, and the courage to expose darkness both without and within. The longer the shadows remained, the more they shaped the city's future. They influenced decisions, whispered doubts, and fractured alliances. Their presence became a test of resilience, forcing the city to confront whether it would succumb to despair or rise above the darkness. The broken circle's curse had opened the door, but the shadows were the messengers of what lay beyond. They carried warnings and secrets, challenges and curses, entwining their fate with every soul brave enough to stand against them. In the end, the shadows among us were not just enemies, they were reminders. Reminders that darkness thrives when ignored, that secrets have a price, and that only through facing the shadows could the city hope to heal and survive. The last light was not a beacon of hope in the usual sense, nor was it a physical flame burning against the dark. It was something far more fragile, a fleeting ember in the heart of despair that flickered where all else threatened to fade. It represented the final chance, the last glimmer of resistance against the consuming shadows and the unrelenting curse that had gripped the city for so long. This light was not easily found. It appeared in moments of clarity when the weight of fear lifted, when courage ignited despite overwhelming odds. It was the strength drawn from memories of better times, the unyielding will to protect those still lost to the darkness, and the desperate hope that the cycle could be broken. The last light was a spark in the eyes of those refusing to surrender, a silent promise whispered in the dead of night. Those who sought the last light understood its rarity. It was not something to be chased blindly or grasped through force. Instead, it emerged from acts of selflessness, honesty, and truth, qualities that the city had long abandoned. Each act that nurtured the last light weakened the shadows, pushing back the suffocating darkness one small step at a time. The city, broken and scarred, was a battleground between the last light and the encroaching night. Every corner held reminders of past failures and ongoing threats, but also signs that not all was lost. The last light was carried by those who dared to face the ghosts of the past, who sought justice for the forgotten, and who refused to let fear dictate their fate. It manifested in quiet resistance. Whispers of truth spoken in secret, evidence uncovered from decades-old cases, and alliances formed between unlikely partners. It was in the courage of a detective who continued searching despite warnings to stop, the tenacity of a family seeking answers after a loved one vanished, and the steadfastness of a community banding together to protect what little remained. The last light was fragile, vulnerable to the city's shadows, but persistent. It flickered in the hearts of individuals who refused to be broken, who faced the darkest truths head-on and chose to carry the weight rather than let it consume them. This ember of hope was a defiant act against despair. Yet, the last light came with a cost. Those who carried it often bore scars invisible to the world, psychological wounds, sleepless nights, and the burden of knowledge that some battles could never truly be won. They carried the memories of those who had been lost, the pain of betrayals, and the constant threat of being swallowed by the darkness themselves. Still, the last light was contagious. Its presence inspired others, sparking movements that grew stronger with each passing day. It reminded the city that even in the darkest hour, there was a chance to reclaim what had been lost. It was a call to remember humanity, to fight for justice, and to break the chains that had bound the city in silence for far too long. The battle for the last light was not fought with weapons or brute force but with resilience, courage, and unwavering commitment to truth. It required confronting uncomfortable realities, exposing corruption, and demanding accountability from those who had hidden in the shadows for so long. The shadows fought back fiercely, attempting to snuff out the light wherever it appeared. They used fear, manipulation, and deceit to try and reclaim the city's soul. But every time they succeeded, the last light returned, sometimes brighter, sometimes dimmer, but never fully extinguished. The city itself seemed to respond to this struggle. Moments of calm were punctuated by sudden waves of darkness and fear, then followed by bursts of hope and progress. The last light was a living force, fluctuating but enduring, symbolizing the fragile balance between despair and salvation. As the city moved closer to its breaking point, the significance of the last light became clearer. It was the hinge on which the future turned. Whether the city would fall entirely into darkness or begin to heal depended on the strength of this fragile flame. The last light was also a mirror reflecting the city's collective conscience. It exposed where people had failed and where redemption was possible. It demanded that no secret remain buried, no injustice ignored, and no voice silenced. The last light called for unity in the face of division, truth in the face of lies, and humanity in the face of dehumanization. Those who embraced the last light knew their journey was far from over. It was a beginning, not an end. The path ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, but it was illuminated by the knowledge that even the smallest spark could ignite a revolution. The last light was not merely a symbol, it was a responsibility. To carry it was to accept the burden of fighting the darkness within and without, to protect the forgotten, and to ensure that the city's story did not end in silence and shadow. As the echoes of the forgotten grew louder and the shadows tightened their grip, the last light stood as the final testament to hope. It was the fragile promise that no matter how deep the darkness, light could still break through. That promise was the city's last, desperate chance to reclaim itself before being swallowed whole. Reckoning's edge was not a place but a moment, a tipping point where all the fractured pieces of the city's tortured past converged, and the fragile balance between light and darkness threatened to collapse entirely. It was the point where secrets long buried clawed their way to the surface, demanding to be faced, no matter the cost. The reckoning was inevitable, and its consequences would shape the fate of every soul caught in the shadows. For years, the city had been haunted by a slow-burning decay, corruption in the halls of power, justice denied, and a silent epidemic of fear. The shadows that once skulked in the periphery had grown bold, empowered by the city's collective silence and the unchecked sins festering beneath the surface. The curse that had been unleashed through the broken circle had not only twisted the spiritual realm but had also exposed the deepest human failings, turning neighbors into enemies and truths into weapons. At reckoning's edge, the city could no longer pretend that the darkness was an external force. It was woven into its very fabric, reflected in every betrayal, every hidden crime, every whispered conspiracy. To step back from the edge was to deny the reality that healing demanded confrontation, painful, unforgiving confrontation. This moment was shaped by those who had carried the last light, those few who refused to succumb, who had pieced together fragments of truth in a desperate attempt to restore balance. Their efforts unearthed uncomfortable revelations: politicians entangled with the occult, law enforcement officials compromised by greed and fear, families shattered by unspeakable acts, and a citywide network of silence that had allowed the darkness to thrive. The reckoning forced choices that no one wanted to make. Whom to trust when allies could be enemies in disguise? How to dismantle systems built on lies without tearing the city apart? Every step forward risked plunging the city deeper into chaos or opening wounds that might never heal. This edge was also a crucible of sacrifice. Some who had fought for the light found themselves broken, their lives forever changed by what they uncovered. The cost of truth was high, often paid in isolation, threats, and loss. Families turned against their own, friendships shattered under the strain, and the line between justice and vengeance blurred. Yet, within this crucible, a fierce clarity emerged. The reckoning was not just about exposing darkness but about reclaiming humanity. It demanded acknowledgement of guilt and the courage to seek redemption. It was a call to rebuild, piece by piece, the shattered trust that had once bound the city. The shadows, sensing their grip loosening, unleashed their final onslaught. They manipulated fears, stoked paranoia, and used every tool at their disposal to prevent the reckoning from succeeding. Violence flared in the streets, public figures disappeared, and whispers of curses spreading faster than truth grew louder. But the last light burned steadier than ever. Communities rallied, truth-tellers rose, and the city's hidden heroes emerged from the rubble. Ordinary people who had suffered in silence took a stand, their courage igniting a movement that refused to let darkness claim victory. The reckoning's edge was a battlefield not only of actions but of wills. It tested the city's resilience, its capacity for forgiveness, and its commitment to justice. It forced a reckoning not just with external demons but with the personal darkness residing within each individual. At its core, this moment revealed a profound truth: the greatest battles are fought within. Every soul confronted their own shadows, their fears, regrets, and failures, deciding whether to succumb or rise. The city's fate hinged on this inner struggle as much as on the external fight. As the reckoning unfolded, the city began to transform. Walls of secrecy crumbled, and light seeped into the darkest corners. The echoes of pain and betrayal remained, but so did the possibility of healing. The city, scarred and battered, stood on the brink of renewal. Reckoning's edge was a moment of endings and beginnings, where the past could no longer be ignored, and the future demanded courage. It was a final stand, a chance to break the cycle of darkness that had held the city captive for too long. No one knew what lay beyond this edge. Some feared complete collapse, others hoped for redemption. But all understood that to step back now was to surrender everything to the shadows. The reckoning was the city's last chance to reclaim its soul. In the silence before the storm, the city held its breath. The fragile balance trembled, but the ember of the last light glowed with unwavering resolve. This was the edge where heroes were forged, secrets unveiled, and the true battle for the city's soul fought. Reckoning's edge was not an end, it was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter written in blood, truth, and sacrifice. The shadows could no longer hide, and the light, though battered, refused to be extinguished. The fate of the city rested on this moment, on the choices made at the edge. Whether it would be consumed by darkness or rise from the ashes depended on the strength of those willing to face the reckoning head-on. Thank you for staying with me through this dark journey into the shadows of the city's soul. If this story sent chills down your spine or made you think twice about the darkness lurking just beneath the surface, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, so you never miss a story that will haunt your dreams and keep you on the edge of your seat. Have you ever experienced something unexplainable? Or know a true crime story that's too chilling to ignore? Drop your thoughts and stories in the comments below. I read every one of them, and your experiences help keep this community alive. Remember, the light may flicker, but as long as we keep searching, hope never dies. Stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next story, right here, where darkness meets truth. Until then, this is Mr. Darksnights, signing off.